"Excuse me, you need to get out of that seat immediately." The voice sliced through the dimmed cabin of the Boeing 787 like a blade through silk. Sharp, cold, laced with authority that had no business being there at 12:47 on a Wednesday morning. Victoria Ashford stood over seat 1A with her arms crossed, platinum blonde hair pulled back in a perfect French twist, red lipstick applied like war paint. She wasn't whispering, she wasn't being discreet. She wanted everyone in first class to hear her taking control of what she'd already decided was a problem that needed solving. The man in the seat didn't move, didn't even open his eyes, just kept sleeping, his navy blue hoodie pulled low over his face, his long legs stretched out in the premium suite that cost more than most people's monthly rent. What Victoria Ashford didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know as she stood there radiating disapproval and certainty, was that in exactly 1 hour, the man she was trying to remove would fire her in front of everyone, and the entire world would watch it happen. Before we dive into what happens next, I need you to do something for me. Tell me where you're watching from. Comment your city below because I want to know how far this story reaches. And if this moment shocks you the way it shocked everyone in that cabin, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Because what you're about to witness isn't just about one flight attendant and one passenger. It's about power prejudice, and what happens when someone who thinks they're untouchable discovers they've made the biggest mistake of their life. In the next hour, you'll see something that changed an entire airline industry. You'll watch justice happen in real time, and you'll understand why sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't anger or violence. It's patience. This is a red-eye flight from JFK to Chicago, a Boeing 787 Dreamliner with purple mood lighting that's supposed to help passengers relax. It's 12:47 a.m., and most people are either asleep or trying to be. The cabin is quiet, peaceful, exactly the kind of atmosphere that premium passengers pay thousands of dollars to experience. But in about 60 seconds, that peace is about to shatter. And it all starts with one question. Who decides who belongs in first class? Is it the person who paid for the ticket? Or is it the person who looks at that ticket holder and makes assumptions based on nothing more than appearance? Now, let's rewind to how this nightmare began. Let's go back 6 hours to a tired man walking through Terminal 5 at JFK, carrying nothing but exhaustion and a leather bag. A man who just wanted to sleep. A man who had no idea he was about to become the center of a viral moment that would expose everything wrong with how we judge each other. Marcus Bennett walked through Terminal 5 at JFK at 11:45 p.m. alone. No assistant trailing behind him with coffee and talking points. No publicist managing his image. No security team clearing a path through the sparse crowd of late-night travelers. Just Marcus moving through the terminal with the kind of quiet exhaustion that comes from 72 hours of negotiations that finally mercifully ended 3 hours ago in a London boardroom. At 44, Marcus had the kind of presence that usually commanded attention the moment he entered a room. 6'2" athletic build maintained through early morning gym sessions he rarely had energy for anymore, with salt and pepper hair just starting to show at his temples. The kind of man who looked like he belonged in boardrooms and corner offices and first-class cabins. But tonight, he didn't look like a CEO worth $400 million. He looked like exactly what he was, a tired man who desperately needed sleep. The navy blue hoodie he wore was Brooks Brothers, purchased 5 years ago, and worn soft from countless flights and lazy Sundays. The dark Levi's jeans had seen better days with a small frayed spot near the right pocket that he kept meaning to replace but never did because they were comfortable. White Nike Air Max sneakers that had walked through more boardrooms than most executives would admit because Marcus had learned a long time ago that comfort mattered more than impressing people who were going to judge him anyway. His only luggage was the battered Toomey leather messenger bag slung across his chest containing a laptop, a few documents he'd review on the flight, and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from closing a $2.8 billion acquisition while fighting jet lag and running on 3 hours of sleep spread across 2 days. The papers were signed. Filed with the FAA exactly 1 hour and 17 minutes ago. Skybridge Airlines was his now. All of it. From the gleaming aircraft sitting at gates around the world to the 7,000 employees who had no idea their lives had just changed in ways they couldn't imagine. The deal had taken 18 months of negotiations due diligence that felt endless and more stress than Marcus wanted to remember. But it was done. And all Marcus wanted, all he needed with every fiber of his being, was to get home to his apartment in Chicago, pour himself 3 fingers of whiskey, and sleep for approximately 20 hours straight. The boarding pass in his pocket showed Seat 1A, Premium Suite, booked 90 minutes ago when it became clear the deal was actually going to close tonight instead of tomorrow. $7,200 for a seat that would let him sleep flat on the 3-hour flight home. Worth every penny. The terminal was nearly deserted at this hour. A few business travelers typing on laptops in the gate area. A couple sleeping on chairs pushed together. A janitor running a floor buffer in lazy circles near the windows where rain hammered against the glass with the kind of intensity that made people grateful to be inside. The gate agent barely glanced at Marcus's boarding pass when he approached. Her eyes were heavy with the fatigue that comes from working the graveyard shift, waving him through with the kind of automatic efficiency that spoke of thousands of identical interactions. The scanner beeped its soft, affirmative green tone. Everything in order. No problems. No issues. Marcus walked down the jet bridge and into the aircraft, the familiar smell of recycled air and new leather greeting him like an old friend. First class was quiet. A few passengers already settled into their seats, most with their reading lights on tablets glowing in the dimmed cabin. He found one, pressed the button to recline the seat to its fully flat position, pulled his hood up to block out the ambient light, and slipped in his noise-canceling earbuds. They were Bose expensive and absolutely worth it for moments like this when the world needed to disappear. Marcus closed his eyes and his body finally began to relax for the first time in 72 hours. The tension in his shoulders started to ease. His breathing slowed and deepened. The endless mental calculations and contract clauses and negotiation strategies that had been running on loop in his mind began to quiet. He was asleep in less than 3 minutes, his face peaceful in a way it rarely was during his waking hours. The kind of deep, necessary sleep that comes from complete physical and mental exhaustion. The kind of sleep that should have been respected and protected by anyone with even basic human decency. But Victoria Ashford had other plans entirely. Victoria Ashford stood in the first-class galley checking her reflection in the polished stainless steel of the beverage cart, with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been perfecting her appearance for 36 years. Platinum blonde hair pulled back in an elegant French twist that hadn't moved even a millimeter despite the humidity and chaos of a typical evening at JFK, not a single strand out of place, every pin positioned with geometric precision. The kind of hairstyle that required 20 minutes and a mirror with perfect lighting, but Victoria had been doing it so long she could manage it in 12 minutes flat. Her uniform was pressed to perfection, navy blue with subtle designer touches that most passengers wouldn't notice but that Victoria knew separated her from flight attendants who simply wore what they were issued. The skirt hit exactly 1 inch above her knee, professional, but showing off legs she maintained through twice-weekly Pilates sessions. Her silk Hermes scarf was tied with the kind of precise artistry that comes from 14 years of practice, the company logo positioned at the exact correct angle. Red lipstick applied like war paint. Not bright red, which would be tacky. Deep crimson. Chanel. Expensive. The kind of lipstick that said she took herself seriously and expected others to do the same. At 5'8" in her required heels, Christian Louboutin knockoffs that looked expensive enough to pass, Victoria Ashford had the kind of elegant, polished appearance that passengers expected from premium cabin crew. Model-like features, though she'd never actually modeled, just knew how to present herself. how to command attention and respect through appearance alone. She'd been with Skybridge Airlines for 14 years. 14 years of working her way up from economy to premium economy to business class, and finally 8 years ago to first class. The Holy Grail. The cabin that mattered. The space where senators and CEOs and celebrities expected service that justified the thousands of dollars they paid. And Victoria had made first class her kingdom. She knew every protocol, every procedure, every unwritten rule about who belonged and who didn't. She could spot a fraudulent upgrade from 50 feet away, could tell within 5 seconds whether someone had earned their seat through legitimate means or had somehow gamed the system with miles or upgrades or favors from gate agents who weren't paying attention. First class wasn't just a section of the aircraft to Victoria. It was a standard. Her standard. And she'd spent 14 years maintaining it with the kind of rigid dedication that supervisors praised and passengers rarely questioned. Her philosophy was simple. First class should feel exclusive because it is exclusive. The passengers who paid full fare deserved an experience that separated them from everyone else on the aircraft. That meant perfect service, yes. But it also meant maintaining an atmosphere. A certain type of person. A certain level of presentation. She surveyed her domain now with satisfaction. The other passengers boarding looked appropriate. A businessman in an expensive Tom Ford suit settling into 3A, already pulling out his laptop for work that apparently couldn't wait until morning. A well-dressed couple in their 50s claiming 4A and 4B designer luggage stowed carefully in the overhead bins. An elderly woman in pearls and a cashmere cardigan making her way slowly to 5B. These were her people. These were the passengers who understood what first class meant. And then Victoria saw him. Seat 1A, the premium suite, the most expensive seat in the cabin. A black man in a hoodie, jeans, and sneakers slumped in the buttery leather seat with his hood pulled low over his face, already asleep like he owned the place. Victoria's perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together in immediate disapproval. This didn't look right. Hoodie. Sneakers. No visible luggage except what looked like a worn messenger bag shoved in the overhead compartment. No suit, no tie, no briefcase, no designer carry-on. Nothing that suggested he could afford or should be in a $7,000 seat. She pulled out her iPad, pulling up the passenger manifest with fingers that moved efficiently across the screen. Seat 1A showed Bennett M. No special designation. No VIP flag. No elite status marker. Just a name and a seat assignment. The reservation had been made 90 minutes ago. Last minute. That was always suspicious. Usually meant someone using miles to upgrade or taking advantage of a seat that opened up when a higher-paying passenger canceled. Victoria's lips pressed together in a thin line. She glanced at Sophia Martinez, the junior flight attendant who was nervously arranging champagne flutes for the pre-departure beverage service. Sophia was new. Only 6 months with the airline, still learning, still too soft. Still giving passengers the benefit of the doubt instead of maintaining standards. Victoria had been watching Sophia carefully. The girl had potential, but she needed to learn that hospitality didn't mean being a pushover. It meant knowing who belonged where and having the courage to enforce boundaries when necessary. And right now Victoria was certain of one thing, the man sleeping in seat 1. A didn't belong in her first-class cabin. She didn't know his story. Didn't care about his story. All she saw was someone who didn't match her carefully maintained image of what a premium passenger should be. And Victoria Ashford always maintained her standards. Victoria approached seat 1A with the kind of purposeful stride that announced her intentions to everyone watching. Her heels clicked against the aircraft floor with sharp, precise beats. Not the gentle, quiet steps that hospitality training taught. These were the footsteps of someone preparing for confrontation. She stopped directly beside Marcus, her shadow falling across his peaceful face. blocking the soft purple mood lighting. Her first tap on his shoulder wasn't gentle. It was firm, authoritative, the kind of physical contact designed to establish dominance rather than offer courtesy. Her perfectly manicured nails pressed into the fabric of his hoodie with just enough pressure to make her intentions clear. Marcus didn't stir. The noise-canceling earbuds were doing their job perfectly, creating a cocoon of blessed silence that his exhausted mind desperately needed. Victoria's jaw tightened. She tapped again, harder this time, letting her fingers dig slightly into his shoulder. Marcus stirred slowly, climbing up from the depths of sleep like someone swimming toward light from the bottom of a pool. Confused, disoriented. He pulled out one earbud and squinted against the cabin lights that seemed impossibly bright after the darkness behind his closed eyelids. "What?" His voice was thick with exhaustion and the grogginess that comes from being yanked out of deep sleep without warning. "Sir, I need to see your boarding pass. Right now." Victoria's voice carried through the quiet cabin loud enough that other passengers glanced up from their phones and tablets. Marcus rubbed his face with both hands, trying to wake up enough to process what was happening. What your boarding pass?" Victoria crossed her arms, her entire posture radiating impatience and disapproval. "There's been a discrepancy with our passenger manifest, and I need to verify your documentation before we can proceed with departure." Marcus blinked several times, still trying to shift from the deep relaxation of sleep to whatever was happening. I scanned it at the gate. Everything was fine. Green light. Nevertheless, I need to see it. Now. Victoria's tone left no room for discussion. Marcus patted his pockets absently, the automatic gesture of someone trying to remember where they put something important. "My phone is somewhere. Look, I'm really tired. Can you just check my name in your system, Bennett?" Marcus Bennett. Seat 1A. Victoria glanced at her iPad, saw the name displayed exactly as he'd said, but her expression didn't change. "Mr. Bennett, this is a premium suite. The fare for this seat is $7,200. Are you certain you booked first class and not economy?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Robert Kim, a tech entrepreneur in seat 2. A looked up from his laptop with a frown. Patricia Donovan, a retired teacher in 2B, shifted in her seat to get a better view of what was happening. Marcus sat up straighter, the fog of sleep beginning to clear, replaced by something sharper, something that looked a lot like recognition. He'd been here before. Different settings, different people, same fundamental problem. "Yes, I'm certain." His voice was firmer now, losing the grogginess and gaining an edge. "I booked it an hour and a half ago through your Platinum reservation line." "I see." Victoria's tone dripped with skepticism. "And may I ask what brings you to first class tonight?" Marcus looked at her directly, meeting her eyes with the kind of calm intensity that should have warned her she was making a mistake. "You may not. That's none of your business." Victoria's face flushed with anger. In 14 years, passengers didn't speak to her like that, didn't challenge her authority, didn't refuse to answer reasonable questions. She snapped her fingers at Sophia Martinez, who was trying to make herself invisible near the beverage cart. The young flight attendant hurried over her movements, nervous and uncertain. "Did you verify this passenger's boarding pass during pre-flight?" Victoria asked, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper that somehow managed to carry. Sophia glanced at Marcus, then back at Victoria. "The gate agents verify everyone before I'm asking if you personally verified his credentials." Victoria cut her off with surgical precision. Sophia looked uncomfortable. "No, but the system shows he's checked in for one." "The system can be manipulated." Victoria's voice was cold clinical. "Miles upgrades, seat reassignments. Errors happen especially on late-night flights when everyone is tired and not paying proper attention." Sophia opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. She'd only been flying for 6 months. wasn't confident enough to challenge a senior purser with 14 years of experience. Victoria continued, her voice still pitched low but perfectly audible to Marcus and the nearby passengers. "Look at him, Sophia. Hoodie, sneakers, no luggage. Does that look like someone who can afford a $7,000 seat?" Marcus heard every word. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. His hands, resting on the armrests, curled slightly into fists before he consciously relaxed them. He'd been here before. Department stores where security followed him through the aisles, hotel lobbies where desk clerks questioned his reservations with barely concealed suspicion. Valet stands where attendants assumed he was picking up someone else's car instead of claiming his own Aston Martin. Usually, he'd pull out his American Express Centurion card. Mention Bennett Capital Group. Watch faces change from suspicion to obsequious apology in seconds flat. It was an effective strategy, but tonight he was too tired for that game. And more importantly, he wanted to see something. Wanted to understand if this was simple rudeness or something deeper. Wanted to know how far Victoria Ashford would take this. Ms. Ashford Marcus read her name tag deliberately. "I can afford this seat. I've shown you. My name is in your system. What exactly is the problem here?" "The problem, sir, is that we have VIP passengers boarding shortly, including Senator Mitchell, and I need to ensure that every passenger in this cabin has legitimate documentation and belongs here." Victoria's voice carried the kind of cold certainty that comes from believing you're absolutely right. "I do belong here." Marcus kept his voice level-controlled. "Then you won't mind producing a physical boarding pass or digital confirmation. Right now." Victoria crossed her arms again, the gesture making her position clear. Marcus took a slow, deep breath. The kind of breath that people take when they're choosing their words carefully, when they're deciding whether to escalate or de-escalate a situation that's spiraling. "I minded being woken up aggressively." His voice was quiet but carried clearly in the hushed cabin. "I minded being questioned about whether I can afford a seat I paid for. And I mind you making assumptions based on how I'm dressed." Victoria's face flushed deeper red. "How dare you accuse me of I have been with this airline for 14 years. I treat every passenger with the same level of professional courtesy. Then why aren't you asking anyone else in this cabin for their boarding pass?" Marcus gestured toward the other passengers who were now openly watching the confrontation. Victoria had no good answer for that. The businessman in 3A was in a suit, yes, but she hadn't verified his ticket. The couple in 4A-B could have been anyone but they looked appropriate, so she'd waved them through. The elderly woman in pearls had gotten a warm smile and offer of assistance. Only Marcus had been challenged. Only Marcus had been questioned. Only Marcus had been deemed suspicious. And everyone in the cabin could see it. Victoria realized she'd made a tactical error, admitting she hadn't checked anyone else's credentials. The admission hung in the air, making her look inconsistent at best, prejudiced at worst. She needed to regain control of the situation, and she needed to do it now. "Sir, if you cannot produce valid documentation within the next 30 seconds, I'm going to have to ask you to gather your belongings and return to the economy cabin where you'll be more comfortable." Her voice had shifted from questioning to commanding, trying to establish the authority that was slipping away. Marcus looked at her with an expression that was perfectly calm and absolutely terrifying in its controlled intensity. "I'm not moving." "Then you're refusing to comply with crew instructions, which is a federal offense." Victoria leaned in slightly, invading his personal space in a way that was designed to intimidate. "I'm refusing to be bullied off a seat I paid for because you don't like my appearance." Marcus didn't lean back, didn't give ground, just held her gaze steadily. "Robert Kim in 2. A quietly pulled out his phone, angling it to capture what was happening. His thumb hovered over the record button for just a second before he pressed it, the red light beginning to blink as 2.3 million followers across his social media platforms gained access to a front-row seat to injustice. Patricia Donovan clutched her purse tighter, her face a mixture of concern and disapproval, though her disapproval was clearly directed at Victoria, not Marcus. Victoria made a decision. She turned to Sophia, who looked like she wanted to disappear into the galley storage compartment. "Call the captain. Tell her we have a non-compliant passenger who is refusing to follow safety protocols and becoming verbally aggressive." Sophia's eyes widened. "Ms. Ashford, he's not being aggressive. That's not your call to make." Victoria's voice was sharp as glass. "Call. Now." Sophia hesitated for just a moment, torn between her instinct to question what she was being told and her understanding that challenging a supervisor could have serious consequences for her own job. She was 23 years old, 6 months into a career she desperately needed to keep. Student loans didn't care about moral complexity. With trembling hands, she picked up the interphone that connected the cabin crew with the flight deck. "Flight deck, this is cabin crew." Her voice was barely steady. "Senior Purser Ashford is requesting security at the gate." The speaker crackled. "Security. What's the situation?" Captain Jennifer Walsh's voice carried the kind of tired patience that comes from dealing with passenger disputes at 1 a.m. Sophia glanced at Victoria, who was listening intently. "There's a disagreement about documentation." Victoria grabbed the phone from Sophia's hand. "Captain, this is Victoria Ashford. We have a passenger who has refused to provide valid boarding credentials, refused to comply with crew instructions, and made threatening statements toward flight crew. I need Port Authority security to remove him before Senator Mitchell boards." Threatening statements. Captain Walsh's skepticism was audible, even through the crackling connection. "What did he say?" "He accused me of racial profiling, which is clearly an attempt to intimidate crew into not following proper protocols." Victoria chose her words carefully, framing Marcus's accurate observation as a threat. "He's also refused repeated requests to verify his ticket." There was a pause on the other end, a sigh that suggested Captain Walsh had dealt with Victoria's security concerns before and wasn't entirely convinced, but also wasn't willing to override her senior purser without more information. "All right. I'll request security. Keep the situation contained." The line went dead. Victoria hung up the phone with a small, satisfied smile. She'd gotten what she wanted: backup, authority, someone else to validate her decision and remove the problem from her cabin. Marcus sat calmly through all of this, his eyes closed, his breathing slow and controlled. But his hand had moved to his hoodie pocket where his phone was already recording everything. The voice memo app had been running since Victoria's first aggressive tap on his shoulder, capturing every word, every accusation, every lie. He'd learned this trick during hostile corporate takeover negotiations, where documentation could mean the difference between success and failure, between truth and he said, she said ambiguity. Always record. Always document. Always have evidence that couldn't be disputed. 3 minutes passed. Victoria stood guard near the galley arms, crossed, watching Marcus like a prison warden watching an inmate she suspected was planning something. Her perfectly applied lipstick seemed to grow sharper, her expression harder. Sophia prepared the pre-departure champagne service with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Crystal flutes clinking against each other with soft, tinkling sounds that seemed too delicate for the tension filling the cabin. More passengers boarded, sensed the atmosphere immediately, and quickly found their seats without the usual small talk and overhead bin negotiations. The businessman in 3A kept glancing at Marcus, then at Victoria, then at his laptop screen where he wasn't actually reading anything. Patricia Donovan leaned slightly toward Robert Kim. "This is wrong," she whispered, her voice carrying the kind of moral certainty that comes from 73 years of watching injustice and finally deciding not to stay quiet anymore. "That poor man hasn't done anything." Robert nodded, his phone still recording his finger, occasionally checking to make sure the red light was still blinking. "I know. I'm getting everything on video. This is insane." A young couple boarding for seat 6A to B immediately picked up on the tension, exchanged glances, and hurried to their seats without making eye contact with anyone. A businessman heading to 7A paused, saw Victoria's posture and Marcus's calm stillness, and quickly moved past without asking the question he'd been about to ask about overhead bin space. The cabin felt like a coiled spring, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something to break. Marcus sat with his eyes closed, looking for all the world like someone meditating or sleeping, but his mind was perfectly clear, perfectly calm, running through scenarios and calculations with the same strategic focus he brought to billion-dollar negotiations. He'd been through this before. Not exactly this, but close enough. He knew what was coming. Knew that Victoria had painted herself into a corner and would have to escalate further to justify her initial decision. Knew that backing down now would mean admitting she'd made assumptions based on prejudice rather than facts. And Marcus knew something else. Something Victoria didn't. He had all the time in the world, because time, like everything else on this aircraft, would soon belong to him in ways Victoria couldn't imagine. He thought about pulling out his phone, showing his identification, ending this confrontation before it escalated further. He could do it, could make this all go away in seconds. But he didn't, because he wanted to see how far she would go. Wanted to understand whether this was ignorance or malice, whether this was about maintaining standards or maintaining the kind of discrimination that survived, because it usually happened quietly in moments where exhausted black men decided it wasn't worth the fight. Tonight, Marcus decided it was worth the fight. Not because he wanted revenge, not because he enjoyed confrontation, but because he was tired. Tired of proving he belonged. Tired of showing credentials to people who should never have questioned him in the first place. Tired of the invisible tax that made every interaction a potential battle over his right to occupy space. So he sat. And he waited. And he let Victoria Ashford reveal exactly who she was. And somewhere in his hoodie pocket, his phone kept recording. Every word. Every accusation. Every lie. Documentation. Evidence. Truth. The things that would matter when this was all over. The cabin continued filling with passengers, each one adding to the pressure building in first class. Every new person who boarded sensed the tension immediately, like walking into a room after an argument has started, but before anything has been resolved. Victoria's patience, already thin, was evaporating. She'd called security 12 minutes ago. The Port Authority officers should have been here by now. Every minute that passed was another minute of this situation disrupting her cabin, undermining her authority, making her look ineffective in front of passengers who paid premium prices for premium service. She made a decision. Victoria walked back to Marcus with purposeful strides, stopping close enough that he could smell her perfume, something expensive and floral that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries. "Sir," her voice was sharp enough to cut glass, "if you cannot produce valid documentation within the next 30 seconds, I'm going to have to ask you to gather your belongings and return to the economy cabin where you'll be more comfortable." Marcus opened his eyes slowly, deliberately. Looked at her with an expression that gave nothing away. "I'm not moving." "Then you're refusing to comply with crew instructions, which is a federal offense." Victoria's hand moved toward Marcus's shoulder, fingers extended clearly, intending to physically guide him out of the seat if necessary. "Don't touch me." Marcus's voice was quiet but carried the kind of steel that made Victoria's hand freeze mid-reach. "Sir, you need to vacate this seat immediately, or I will have you removed by security." Her hand was still extended, hovering inches from his shoulder, wanting to make contact, but suddenly uncertain about crossing that line. "You're making a mistake." Marcus met her eyes directly. "A very big mistake. The only mistake here is you thinking you could board first class dressed like you're going to a college basketball game." The words came out before Victoria could stop them, her frustration and anger overwhelming her usual careful phrasing. The cabin went absolutely silent. Robert Kim's eyes widened behind his phone. Patricia Donovan gasped audibly. The businessman in 3A stopped pretending to work on his laptop and stared openly. The young couple in 6A-B exchanged shocked glances. Everyone had heard it. The mask had slipped. The polite fiction of security protocols and verification procedures had cracked, revealing exactly what this was really about. Victoria realized immediately that she'd gone too far, said too much, exposed the prejudice she'd been trying to disguise as professional standards. Her face flushed red, a blotchy shade that clashed with her carefully applied makeup. But she couldn't back down now. Couldn't apologize. Couldn't admit that maybe possibly she'd made assumptions based on appearance rather than facts. Because that would mean acknowledging something about herself she didn't want to examine too closely. So instead, she doubled down. "Sophia." Her voice cut through the silence like a whip crack. "Call security again. Tell them we have an increasingly hostile passenger who is refusing to comply with direct crew instructions and making threatening statements." Sophia looked at Marcus, who was sitting perfectly still, hands visible on the armrests, expression calm. He didn't look hostile, didn't look threatening, just looked like a tired man who'd been accused of something he hadn't done and was refusing to accept the accusation. Ms. Ashford Sophia's voice was small and certain. "He's not being hostile. He's just sitting there. Are you questioning my judgment?" Victoria whirled on the younger flight attendant with fury that had been building for the past 15 minutes and now needed somewhere to go. "Because if you're questioning my judgment, perhaps you're not ready for first-class service." Sophia's face went pale. She needed this job. Needed the health insurance, the flight benefits, the paycheck that helped cover student loans and rent in an expensive city. She couldn't afford to be transferred back to economy, or worse, fired for insubordination. "No, ma'am," Sophia whispered. "I'll call again." But before she could reach for the phone, heavy footsteps echoed up the jet bridge. Multiple people, moving quickly. The distinctive sound of duty belts laden with equipment. Security had arrived. Victoria's satisfied smile returned. Finally, authority figures who would back up her decision, who would remove this problem from her cabin, who would validate that she'd been right all along. Marcus heard the footsteps too. He didn't look worried, didn't look scared. His expression remained perfectly calm, almost serene, like someone waiting for a bus they knew was coming. He shifted slightly in his seat, making sure his phone in his hoodie pocket was still recording, making sure the angle would capture whatever happened next. Documentation, evidence, truth. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Multiple sets of boots on the jet bridge floor, the sound unmistakable and ominous. Robert Kim adjusted his phone's angle, making sure he had a clear view of the entrance. His follower count had jumped by 40,000 in the past 10 minutes, as viewers shared the live stream drawn by the unfolding confrontation. Patricia Donovan gripped her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. The businessman in 3A closed his laptop, completely no longer pretending to work. And Victoria Ashford stood near the galley arms, crossed vindication written all over her face. She had no idea that in about 45 minutes she would be escorted off this aircraft herself. No idea that the calm man in the hoodie was about to become her worst nightmare. No idea that she'd just destroyed a 14-year career with 15 minutes of prejudice. 2 Port Authority police officers appeared in the aircraft entrance, their presence immediately commanding attention from every passenger in first class. Officer Derek Hayes was 45 with 18 years of experience dealing with airport disturbances that ranged from drunk passengers to actual security threats. His partner, Officer Lisa Chen, was 32 with 6 years on the job. Sharp eyes that missed nothing and a healthy skepticism about late-night calls to aircraft that usually turned out to be arguments over overhead bin space. They both looked annoyed rather than concerned. Late-night flights meant dealing with tired people making poor decisions, and 90% of the security situations they responded to turned out to be minor disputes that could have been resolved with basic communication skills. "What's the situation?" Officer Hayes asked, his hand resting instinctively near the taser on his duty belt, though his body language suggested he wasn't actually expecting to use it. Victoria straightened her uniform, adjusted her scarf with quick, precise movements, and stepped forward with the confidence of someone who believed she had righteousness on her side. "That man in seat 1. She pointed at Marcus with a manicured finger that trembled slightly from adrenaline, has refused to show valid documentation for his seat, refused to comply with crew instructions, and made threatening statements when I attempted to verify his credentials." Officer Chen looked at Marcus, who appeared completely calm, hands resting on the armrests, expression neutral. She'd seen threatening passengers before. This man didn't fit the profile. No aggressive posture, no raised voice, no signs of intoxication or drug use. Just someone sitting quietly in a seat, threatening statements. Officer Chen's tone carried skepticism. "What kind of threats?" "He accused me of racial profiling." Victoria's voice rose slightly, which was clearly intended to intimidate me into not following proper security procedures. Officer Hayes exchanged a glance with his partner. "That's not really a threat, ma'am. That's an accusation. There's a difference." Victoria's face flushed. "He also said I was making a mistake." That sounded threatening to me. The way he said it, his tone. Officer Hayes suppressed a sigh. He'd dealt with overzealous flight attendants before, people who interpreted any pushback as a threat. But he also knew that crew members had final authority over their cabins, and refusing to cooperate with crew instructions could technically constitute interference with flight operations. He approached Marcus with the careful steps of someone who'd learned through experience that assumptions could get you in trouble. His partner followed, positioning herself slightly to the side, hands free, ready to respond if the situation escalated. "Sir, good evening." Officer Hayes kept his voice neutral, professional. "We're going to need you to step out of that seat and come with us to sort this out." Marcus opened his eyes, looked at both officers with the kind of calm assessment that suggested he was evaluating them as much as they were evaluating him. "Am I being detained?" "We're asking you to cooperate with crew instructions." Officer Hayes used the standard phrasing that wasn't quite an answer. "I've done nothing wrong." Marcus's voice was quiet but clear. "I have a valid ticket for this seat. My name is in their system. Marcus Bennett, seat 1A. You can verify it yourself." Officer Chen turned to Victoria. "Is his name in your system?" Victoria hesitated for just a fraction of a second before answering. "Yes, but so he has a valid reservation for this seat." Officer Chen's tone sharpened slightly. "The reservation is valid, but I have concerns about how it was obtained." Victoria's voice carried the kind of condescension that comes from years of believing your judgment is superior to everyone else's. "He doesn't have the profile of our typical first-class passenger, and when I asked reasonable questions about his travel, he became defensive and accusatory." Robert Kim couldn't stay quiet anymore. "Officers, I've been sitting here the whole time." He gestured to his seat in 2A. "He hasn't been aggressive at all. She's the one who woke him up and started interrogating him." Victoria whirled on Robert. "Sir, this doesn't concern you. You need to—" "I'm a passenger in this cabin." Robert's voice was firm. "This absolutely concerns me. You're harassing this man for no reason, and I've got the whole thing on video." His phone was still recording the red light blinking steadily. Patricia Donovan spoke up from 2B, her voice carrying the kind of moral authority that comes from 7 decades of watching the world and finally deciding to speak truth to power. I agree with that young man. I've been watching the whole thing. That gentleman, she gestured to Marcus, has been nothing but polite. She's the one being aggressive. Both of you need to stop interfering with crew operations. Victoria's voice was rising now, her carefully maintained composure cracking under the pressure of passengers openly contradicting her version of events. Officer Hayes held up a hand, trying to regain control of a situation that was rapidly becoming more complicated than a simple passenger dispute. Everyone just... The aircraft door opened again, and a new figure entered. Senator Andrew Mitchell, 55 years old, with silver hair and an expensive charcoal suit, stepped into first class with the kind of presence that comes from 3 terms in the United States Senate and the absolute certainty that rooms rearrange themselves around him. His aide followed close behind, carrying a leather briefcase and already pulling out a tablet to handle whatever needed handling. Senator Mitchell took in the scene immediately. Police officers, a flight attendant who looked like she was losing control of the situation, passengers watching with obvious concern, and a black man in casual clothes sitting calmly in seat 1B right next to where the senator was supposed to sit. What's going on here? The senator's voice carried natural authority. Why are there police officers on this aircraft? Victoria immediately shifted her tone, her entire demeanor changing to something deferential and apologetic. Senator Mitchell, I'm so sorry for this disruption. We have a minor security situation that's being resolved. Your seat will be available momentarily. Senator Mitchell looked at Marcus, taking in the hoodie and jeans and sneakers. Security situation. This man... Yes, Senator. Victoria seized the opportunity to have someone with real authority validate her concerns. He's been unable to provide proper documentation for his seat and... Has he been through... TS? A security? Senator Mitchell interrupted his political instincts, already sensing something wrong with the narrative he was hearing. Officer Hayes answered. Yes, sir. He went through the checkpoint. He has a valid boarding pass. Senator Mitchell looked between Victoria and Marcus, his expression thoughtful. Young man, he addressed Marcus directly. Do you have a ticket for this seat? Marcus met the senator's eyes with the kind of directness that most people didn't use when addressing elected officials. Yes, Senator, I do. Then what exactly is the problem? Senator Mitchell turned back to Victoria, and his tone had shifted from polite inquiry to something sharper. Victoria fumbled for words, suddenly aware that explaining her concerns to a United States senator might sound different than explaining them to a flight attendant or police officer. Senator, it's a matter of maintaining standards in first class. We have protocols about verifying passenger credentials, especially when someone doesn't match the typical profile. Senator Mitchell's eyebrows rose. What profile? I didn't mean it like that. Victoria's face was turning red again. I just meant that our premium cabin passengers usually dress more formally for the level of service we provide. Senator Mitchell studied her for a long moment, and something in his expression suggested he understood exactly what she meant and wasn't impressed by it. I see. So you're removing a paying passenger because you don't approve of his clothing? No, Senator, it's about security. Victoria was floundering now, trying to find purchase in an argument that was slipping away from her. I've flown first class on this airline for 20 years. Senator Mitchell's voice had gone cold. I've seen CEOs in sweatpants and tech billionaires in flip-flops. Since when does Skybridge have a dress code for first class? Victoria opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No response came out. The senator's aide leaned in, whispered something in his ear. The senator's expression changed subtly. His eyes widened slightly. He glanced at Marcus again, this time with new understanding. Bennett. The senator's voice was quiet, uncertain. Marcus Bennett. His aide nodded confirmation, showing him something on the tablet. Oh. The single syllable carried weight. The senator suddenly looked like someone who just realized they were in the middle of something they very much didn't want to be in the middle of. He stepped back from the confrontation, his political survival instincts kicking in. "Well, I'm sure you'll sort this out appropriately. I'll just wait in the lounge until this is resolved." And with that, Senator Andrew Mitchell exited the aircraft as quickly as he'd entered, his aides scurrying behind him, both of them clearly wanting distance from whatever was about to happen. Victoria watched him go, confusion written across her face. Why had the senator retreated? What had his aide told him? What did he know Marcus had seen the recognition in the senator's eyes? Had watched the exact moment when political calculation overtook principle, had noted the cowardice with the same clinical assessment he brought to evaluating business partners. Officer Hayes, meanwhile, was losing patience with the entire situation. His shift ended in 3 hours, and this passenger dispute was eating into time he could have spent on actual security concerns. "All right, here's what's going to happen." His voice cut through the confusion. "Sir, you're going to get out of that seat and come with us to the gate. We'll verify your credentials there, and if everything checks out, we'll get you reboarded." "No." Marcus's response was simple final. "Excuse me." Officer Hayes's hand moved toward his equipment belt. "I said no." Marcus didn't raise his voice, didn't add emphasis, just stated fact. "I have a valid ticket. My name is in the system. I've done nothing wrong. I'm not leaving this seat. Sir, if you refuse to comply, we'll have to place you under arrest for interfering with flight operations." Officer Chen's voice was harder now, the good cop approach giving way to clear warning. "I'm not interfering with anything." Marcus kept his hands visible on the armrests, his posture non-threatening. "I'm sitting in a seat I paid $7,200 for. She's the one interfering by harassing a paying passenger. See?" Victoria's voice was triumphant. "He's refusing to cooperate with law enforcement. This is exactly what I was talking about." Officer Hayes sighed heavily. "Sir, I'm giving you one last chance. Get out of the seat voluntarily or we'll remove you by force." "Do what you have to do, officer." Marcus's voice remained calm. "But I want it on record that I am not resisting. I am simply declining to be illegally removed from a seat I have every right to occupy." He pulled his phone from his hoodie pocket, held it up so both officers could see the screen clearly. The voice memo app was open, the recording timer showing 18 minutes and counting. "And I've recorded this entire interaction. Every word, every false accusation, every illegal demand." Victoria's eyes widened. "You've been recording. It's perfectly legal to record in a public space." Marcus's tone was almost conversational. "And this conversation is very much public." Robert Kim held up his own phone. "I've got it on video too, all of it. And about 3 million people are watching it live right now." Victoria went pale. 3 million? My followers?" Robert's voice was matter-of-fact. "Tech entrepreneur, social media presence. This is the kind of content that goes viral. Passenger discrimination, racial profiling, false police reports. You're probably trending on Twitter already." Officer Hayes looked at Officer Chen. Both of them had the same thought simultaneously. This was going to be a disaster, not just for the flight attendant but potentially for them too, if they ended up on the wrong side of a viral video showing wrongful arrest. "Should we call a supervisor?" Officer Chen's voice was quiet. Too late now. Officer Hayes's voice was resigned. "We're committed." He turned to Marcus one final time. "Sir, I'm asking you one final time. Please exit the aircraft voluntarily." "No." Marcus's answer hadn't changed. "Then you're under arrest for trespassing on an aircraft." Officer Hayes reached for his handcuffs with movements that suggested he really, really wished he was anywhere else right now. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Patricia Donovan stood up in protest. "This is wrong! That man hasn't done anything." "Ma'am, sit down or you'll be removed as well." Victoria's voice was sharp, desperate to regain some semblance of control. Marcus stood slowly, deliberately. His full height, 6'2", filled the space, his broad shoulders and athletic build suddenly very apparent. He moved with careful, controlled grace, keeping his movements slow and his hands visible at all times. The kind of careful movements that black men learn to make around police officers. The kind that say, "I'm not a threat. Please don't hurt me. Please don't give yourself an excuse. You're making a mistake." Marcus's voice was quiet as he turned around, placing his hands behind his back. "Both of you. This airline is going to regret this. You can file a complaint later, sir." Officer Hayes clicked the handcuffs into place, the metallic sound echoing through the silent cabin like a gunshot. Marcus didn't flinch, didn't pull away, didn't give them any reason to use additional force. He just stood there, hands cuffed behind his back, his expression calm despite the humiliation of being arrested in front of dozens of strangers. But his eyes held something else, not anger, not fear, something closer to patience, like someone waiting for a bus they knew was coming, like someone who knew a secret that everyone else was about to learn. The click of metal on metal echoed through the first-class cabin with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the absolute silence that had fallen over everyone. Marcus Bennett stood with his hands cuffed behind his back, his navy blue hoodie slightly rumpled from the movement, his face showing no emotion beyond a kind of calm acceptance. Not the acceptance of guilt. The acceptance of someone who'd been here before in different ways, in different contexts, but with the same fundamental dynamic being judged, being found wanting, being punished for the crime of existing in spaces where someone decided he didn't belong. Officer Hayes kept one hand on Marcus's arm, the grip firm but not painful. His expression suggested he was already having second thoughts about this arrest, but he'd committed to it, had followed through, and now he had to see it through to whatever conclusion was coming. Officer Chen stood slightly behind her partner, her hand resting on her equipment belt, her eyes scanning the cabin full of passengers who were now openly recording the scene. She'd been a police officer long enough to know when a situation felt wrong, and this situation felt very, very wrong. But procedure was procedure, and they'd given the passenger multiple chances to comply. Victoria Ashford stood near the galley with her arms crossed and a tight smile of satisfaction on her face. After 18 minutes of confrontation, of having her authority questioned, of dealing with a passenger who refused to acknowledge her power over this cabin, she'd won. Security had arrived. The problem passenger was in handcuffs. Order would be restored. She'd done her job, protected her cabin, maintained her standards, just like she'd been doing for 14 years. The fact that every passenger in first class was looking at her with expressions ranging from shock to disgust to outright horror didn't register. The fact that Robert Kim's phone was still recording and live streaming to over 3 million viewers didn't matter. The fact that Sofia Martinez was crying silently near the beverage cart, tears streaming down her young face, didn't concern her. All Victoria saw was vindication. What she didn't see was that her entire career was about to end in the next 40 minutes. Robert Kim adjusted his phone angle, making sure he had a clear shot of Marcus in handcuffs, the officers flanking him, and Victoria's satisfied expression. His follower count had jumped to 3.2 million in the last 3 minutes, with thousands of comments flooding in faster than his phone could display them. "This is insane. Is this real? Someone better be getting fired for this. I can't believe what I'm watching. That man hasn't done anything wrong. This is racial profiling on camera." Patricia Donovan had tears in her eyes, one hand pressed to her chest, the other gripping her purse so hard her knuckles had gone white. In 73 years of life, She'd witnessed injustice before, had seen people treated unfairly, had watched discrimination happen in department stores and restaurants and hotels, but she'd never seen someone arrested for sitting in a seat they'd paid for. Never watched police officers handcuff a man whose only crime was sleeping while black. The businessman in 3A had his laptop closed completely, now his attention riveted on the scene unfolding. He was white wealthy, had flown first class hundreds of times in expensive suits and casual clothes and everything in between, and never once had anyone questioned his right to be there. Never once had anyone demanded his boarding pass after he'd already been seated. Never once had anyone called the police on him for existing in premium space. The contrast wasn't lost on him, and it wouldn't be lost on anyone watching this video. The young couple in 6A-B sat frozen, their hands clasped together, their faces showing the kind of horrified fascination that comes from watching something terrible happen and being unable to look away. They were in their late 20s, both white, both successful enough to afford first-class tickets on a business trip. Both suddenly acutely aware of privileges they'd never had to think about before. Sofia Martinez stood near the galley, her whole body trembling. She'd made the call to security. She'd followed Victoria's orders because she was 23 years old and 6 months into a job she desperately needed, and she didn't know how to stand up to someone with 14 years of authority and experience. But she knew this was wrong. This had known from the moment Victoria first approached Marcus, had tried to suggest alternatives, tried to point out that the system showed he had a valid reservation, tried to question whether calling security was really necessary, and she'd been shut down. Told to follow orders, reminded that challenging her supervisor would have consequences. So now Marcus Bennett stood in handcuffs because she'd followed orders, because she'd been too afraid, too uncertain, too new to stand firm against injustice when it mattered most. The tears on her face were tears of shame. Marcus turned his head slightly, making eye contact with Victoria across the cabin space. His expression was perfectly calm, almost serene. And he smiled, not a big smile, not mocking or triumphant, just the slightest curve at the corner of his mouth. The kind of smile that said, "You have absolutely no idea what you've just done." Victoria's own smile faltered. Just for a second, just long enough for a tiny sliver of doubt to creep in through the certainty. Why was he so calm? Why wasn't he angry or protesting or threatening lawsuits? Why did he look like someone who knew something she didn't? She pushed the doubt away. She'd made the right call. The man had refused to cooperate, had refused to show proper documentation, had accused her of racism to deflect from his own suspicious behavior. Security had agreed with her assessment. The police had put him in handcuffs. She was right. She had to be right. Because if she wasn't right, then she was something much worse. Officer Hayes cleared his throat. "We're going to take him to the terminal to verify his credentials. If everything checks out, we'll see about getting him on a later flight. He won't be getting on any Skybridge flight tonight." Victoria's voice carried the kind of finality that suggested the matter was closed, not after interfering with crew operations and creating a security disturbance. "Ma'am, that's not your call to make." Officer Chen's tone was mild, but there was steel underneath. "We'll handle the law enforcement aspect. The airline can make their own decisions about future bookings." Victoria opened her mouth to argue, then thought better of it. She'd gotten what she wanted. The problem passenger was being removed. Her cabin would return to normal. The flight could depart. That's when they heard new footsteps, fast footsteps, running footsteps. Someone sprinting up the jet bridge like their life depended on it, taking the steps 2 at a time with desperate, frantic urgency. Everyone turned toward the entrance. Even Officer Hayes paused, his hand still on Marcus's arm, confused about who would be running toward an aircraft at 1 in the morning. Even Victoria stepped forward, her satisfaction beginning to crack around the edges. The footsteps got louder, closer, faster. And then Captain Jennifer Walsh burst through the aircraft door like someone trying to prevent a catastrophe that was already in motion. Captain Jennifer Walsh stood in the aircraft entrance chest, heaving face flushed red from sprinting through the terminal, her uniform slightly disheveled in a way that suggested she'd literally dropped everything and run the moment she'd gotten the emergency notification on her tablet. She was 52 years old, had been flying for Skybridge Airlines for 28 years, had worked her way up from first officer to captain to chief pilot for the Northeast region. In nearly 3 decades of aviation, she'd dealt with medical emergencies, mechanical failures, severe weather, difficult passengers, and every other crisis that could happen at 35,000 feet or on the ground. But she'd never, ever had to deal with this. Her tablet was clutched in one white-knuckled hand, the screen still showing urgent notifications that had started flooding in at 12:52 a.m. Legal alerts, board notifications, emergency bulletins marked urgent and confidential, and requires immediate action. She'd been in the crew briefing room reviewing weather reports for her own flight scheduled to depart at 3 a.m. when her tablet had practically exploded with alerts. Had read the first notification 3 times because surely she was misunderstanding what it said. And then she'd run. Sprinted through Terminal 5 faster than she'd moved since her 20s, dodging late-night travelers and maintenance crews, her mind racing through implications and consequences and the absolute catastrophe that was unfolding on one of her aircraft. Stop. The word came out as nearly a shout, her voice cracking with desperation and panic. Nobody move. Don't take him anywhere. There's been a massive mistake. Officer Hayes looked at her in confusion, his hand still on Marcus's arm, still preparing to escort him off the aircraft. We've got this under control, Captain. Trespasser just like your crew called in. We'll have him processed and off your aircraft in 5 minutes. Let him go. Captain Walsh's chest was still heaving as she struggled to catch her breath, struggled to find words adequate to express the magnitude of what was happening. Right now. Let him go immediately. Ma'am, this is a law enforcement matter, Officer Chen started to say, but Captain Walsh cut her off. I don't care. Her voice rose to nearly a shout, her professional composure completely abandoned. Let him go. There's been a catastrophic mistake. She shoved the tablet toward the officers, her hands shaking so badly the screen wavered. Her face had gone from red with exertion to white with horror as the full implications of the situation became clear. Victoria stepped forward from the galley, her confidence beginning to crack, but still trying to maintain control. Captain Walsh, I can explain. This passenger refused to provide proper documentation and became verbally aggressive when I attempted to verify his credentials, according to standard security protocols. Victoria. Captain Walsh's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but somehow that quiet tone was more terrifying than if she'd been shouting. Please tell me you didn't. Please tell me you did not just have this man arrested. The silence that followed those words was absolute. Not the comfortable quiet of a late-night flight. Not the gentle hum of auxiliary power units or the soft whisper of climate control. This was different. This was the kind of silence that comes before the world changes, the kind that makes people hold their breath without realizing it, the kind that marks the exact moment between before and after. Every passenger was frozen. Robert Kim's phone was still recording the red light, blinking steadily, capturing everything. Patricia Donovan leaned forward in her seat, one hand still pressed to her chest. The businessman in 3A had stopped breathing. The young couple in 6AB clutched each other's hands tighter. Sophia Martinez stood near the galley, her face tear-stained, knowing with absolute certainty that something terrible was about to be revealed. Victoria's confident expression began to crumble. Something in Captain Walsh's face, the absolute horror, the sick recognition, the dawning understanding of catastrophe made doubt flood in like ice water. I followed. Protocol. Victoria said, her voice smaller now, uncertain. He wouldn't verify his credentials. He was becoming aggressive. He accused me of racial profiling, which was clearly an attempt to intimidate me into, "Do you know who this is?" Captain Walsh's voice was shaking. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Victoria looked at Marcus, who stood calmly in handcuffs, his expression showing nothing but that slight knowing smile. "He said his name was Bennett, but he's not on any VIP list, and he certainly doesn't look like not on the VIP list." Captain Walsh's voice rose to genuine hysteria. She held up the tablet with both shaking hands, the screen displaying legal documents. FAA filings, urgent notifications, news alerts, all of them screaming the same impossible, catastrophic truth. "Victoria, this is Marcus Bennett, CEO of Bennett Capital Group." The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. The private equity firm that finalized the acquisition of Skybridge Airlines at 11 o'clock tonight. The paperwork was filed with the FAA at 11:47 p.m. The board sent emergency notifications to all senior staff at midnight. Dead silence. Victoria's face drained of all color. Sophia gasped audibly. Robert Kim's eyes widened. Patricia Donovan whispered, "Oh, my Lord." Captain Walsh continued, her voice barely above a whisper now, but somehow carrying more weight than if she'd been shouting. "He doesn't need to be on the VIP list, Victoria. He owns the VIP list. He owns this aircraft. He owns the fuel in the tanks. He owns the seat you just had him arrested for occupying. And he owns the company that signs your paycheck." The silence that followed was the sound of Victoria Ashford's world ending. Officer Hayes's hand loosened immediately on Marcus's arm, his face going through a rapid progression of emotions, confusion, recognition, horror, sick understanding, as his brain processed what the captain had just said. Officer Chen took an involuntary step backward, her hand moving away from her equipment belt, her eyes going wide as she looked at Marcus with new understanding. They'd just handcuffed a billionaire. They'd just arrested the owner of the airline. They just made the kind of mistake that ended careers. "Oh, God," Officer Hayes breathed, fumbling for his handcuff key with hands that had suddenly started shaking. "Mr. Bennett, I am so sorry. We had no idea you had every opportunity to verify before putting handcuffs on me." Marcus's voice was quiet, controlled, but carrying an edge of steel that hadn't been there before. "You had multiple witnesses telling you I hadn't done anything wrong. You had a passenger manifest that showed my valid reservation. You chose to believe her version without question. Sir, we were responding to a crew member's report." Officer Chen started, her voice defensive, but already cracking around the edges. "A false report," Marcus cut her off, "which is a federal crime, making false statements to law enforcement officials. But we'll get to that." The handcuffs came off with a metallic click that seemed impossibly loud in the silent cabin. Marcus rubbed his wrists where the metal had dug in red marks already forming on his skin. His eyes never left Victoria. She'd backed against the galley counter, one hand gripping the edge for support, her face cycling through colors, pale white, blotchy red, sickly gray, as her brain tried to process what was happening. Tried to understand how the problem passenger in the hoodie had transformed into the owner of the airline. Tried to rewrite the last 25 minutes in a way that made sense. But there was no way to rewrite it. No way to explain it away. No way to make it anything other than what it was: catastrophic prejudice caught on camera and witnessed by dozens of people. Captain Walsh stepped forward, her professional training trying to reassert itself even as her hands continued to shake. "Mr. Bennett, on behalf of Skybridge Airlines, I cannot begin to express how deeply sorry." Marcus held up one hand to stop her. His movements were calm, controlled, carrying the kind of quiet authority that filled the cabin without raising his voice. "Captain Walsh, you're not the one who needs to apologize. You tried to stop this. I appreciate that." He turned to face Victoria directly. She looked like she might faint, her carefully applied makeup now stark against skin that had gone completely pale, her perfect French twist beginning to come loose at the edges, her designer scarf slightly askew. "Ms. Ashford." His voice was perfectly level. "Do you remember what you said to me about 20 minutes ago?" Tears were forming in Victoria's eyes now, though they seemed to come from fear rather than remorse. "Sir, if I had known who you were—" "Stop." The word cracked like a whip. "Right there. If you had known I was the owner, you would have treated me with respect. That's exactly the problem." He took a step closer. Not threatening, but his physical presence, 6'2", broad shoulders. The quiet power of someone who controlled billions of dollars suddenly seemed to fill the entire cabin. "You said I didn't have the profile of a typical first-class passenger." His voice was still calm, still controlled, but carrying weight that made every word land like a hammer. "What profile was that exactly?" Victoria opened her mouth, but no sound came out. What could she say? How could she explain that she'd meant nothing racist, nothing prejudiced, when every person in the cabin had heard exactly what she'd meant? "You said I looked like I just rolled out of somewhere." Marcus continued, his eyes locked on hers. "You questioned whether I could afford a $7,000 seat. You demanded documentation from me and no one else. You called police officers and told them I was being aggressive when I was sleeping. You lied about my behavior to law enforcement officials in an attempt to have me arrested." "Please." Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. "I made a mistake. I was just trying to maintain standards." Marcus's tone was ice. "No. You were making assumptions based on how I look, based on the color of my skin and the clothes I'm wearing, based on prejudices you've been allowed to act on for 14 years without consequence." He pulled his phone from his hoodie pocket, held it up so everyone could see the screen. The voice memo app was still running, showing 32 minutes and 17 seconds of recorded audio. "I have you on record, Ms. Ashford. Every word, every false accusation, every lie you told these officers about my behavior. You said I was aggressive. You said I was threatening. You said I refused to cooperate. All lies, all documented." Victoria made a sound that was half sob, half gasp. The tears were flowing freely now, black mascara creating dark tracks down her face, but they still looked like tears of self-preservation rather than genuine remorse. "Please." Her voice cracked. "I've been with this airline for 14 years. I have a mortgage. I have bills. I can't lose this job." "You had 14 years. Marcus corrected, his voice carrying absolute finality. Past tense. "And you just spent all of that accumulated goodwill trying to have a paying passenger arrested because you didn't like his clothing choices." Robert Kim spoke up from 2A, still recording, his voice carrying across the silent cabin. "Mr. Bennett, for the record, she never asked anyone else in this cabin for their boarding pass. Not me, not Mrs. Donovan, not the businessman in 3A, not the couple in 4A to B, just you." Patricia Donovan stood up, her voice shaking with emotion. "That's absolutely right. I'm 73 years old. I've been flying for 50 years, and I have never seen anything so disgraceful. This young man was sleeping peacefully, and she woke him up and treated him like a criminal." More passengers spoke up now, their voices overlapping. "I recorded it too, already uploaded to TikTok. This is exactly why I'm done with this airline. Absolutely unacceptable. She should be fired." Marcus looked at Victoria, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried to every corner of the cabin. "Do you see this, Ms. Ashford? These are witnesses, real passengers who watched you profile me, harass me, lie about me, have me arrested for sleeping in a seat I paid for." Victoria's voice was barely audible. "I'm sorry." "No, you're not." Marcus's tone was certain. "You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught. And you're sorry it was me." He turned to address the entire cabin, his voice shifting from confrontation to something else, something that sounded like leadership. What happened here tonight wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice. Ms. Ashford chose to see a black man in first class and assume he didn't belong. Chose to demand documentation she didn't demand from anyone else. Chose to escalate until police involvement seemed justified. Chose to lie about my behavior when the truth didn't fit her narrative. He looked back at Victoria. And now she's going to face the consequences of those choices. The officers had backed away from Marcus completely now, creating physical distance from what was clearly going to become a situation they wanted no part of. Officer Hayes was already on his radio, calling his supervisor, his voice low and urgent, as he tried to explain how they'd just arrested a billionaire on false charges. Officer Chen stood with her arms crossed, her expression suggesting she was mentally reviewing every second of the interaction, already composing the report she'd have to write, and trying to figure out how to explain their actions in a way that wouldn't end both their careers. Captain Walsh stood near the entrance, her tablet still clutched in white-knuckled hands, her face showing the kind of sick horror that comes from watching a catastrophe unfold and being unable to prevent it. She'd tried. She'd run as fast as she could, but she'd been 17 minutes too late. Sophia Martinez was openly crying now, tears streaming down her young face as she realized the full magnitude of what had happened. She'd made the call to the flight deck. She'd told the captain they needed security. She'd followed Victoria's orders, even though every instinct had screamed that this was wrong. And now she was watching the consequences unfold in real time. Senator Andrew Mitchell reappeared at the aircraft entrance, having apparently been watching from the jet bridge, waiting to see how this situation resolved. His political instincts were screaming that he needed to be on the right side of this, needed to distance himself from Victoria's actions, needed to make sure his name didn't get attached to racial profiling when the videos went viral. Mr. Bennett. The senator's voice was carefully calibrated, showing just the right amount of concern and regret. I owe you an apology. I recognized your name when my aide told me, and I should have spoken up more forcefully. Instead, I left. That was cowardly, and I'm sorry. Marcus looked at him with an expression that gave nothing away. Yes, it was. The senator flinched at the blunt assessment, but pushed forward. For what it's worth, you have my full support in whatever actions you choose to take regarding this incident. And I'll be personally reviewing Skybridge's federal contracts to ensure this kind of discrimination isn't happening across the industry. We'll hold hearings if necessary. I appreciate that, Senator. Marcus's tone suggested he'd believe it when he saw it. That's the kind of leadership we need. Actual accountability, not just words. Senator Mitchell nodded, looking relieved to be back in Marcus's good graces, or at least not actively in his bad graces. He moved quickly to his seat in 1B, his aide following with their luggage, both of them clearly wanting to disappear into the background of whatever was about to happen. Marcus turned his attention back to Victoria. She was still gripping the galley counter for support, her legs looking like they might give out at any moment. The sophisticated, elegant senior purser who'd ruled first-class cabins for 14 years had been reduced to a trembling, crying mess in less than half an hour. As for the union, Marcus's voice was conversational now, almost casual, which somehow made it more terrifying. I reviewed your collective bargaining agreement during the due diligence phase of our acquisition. Very thorough document. Lots of protections for employees. Strong language about arbitration and appeal processes. Victoria's face showed a flicker of hope. The union. Yes, she had union representation. They'd protect her. They'd fight for her. She had rights. Section 14, subsection B. Marcus continued pulling out his phone and scrolling through something. Gross misconduct involving falsification of security threats against passengers constitutes grounds for immediate termination without arbitration or appeal process. The hope died. died in Victoria's eyes. "You falsified a security threat, Miss Ashford." Marcus's voice was perfectly level. "You told law enforcement officials that I was aggressive, threatening, and hostile. You made statements you knew to be false in order to have me removed from this aircraft. That's not a policy disagreement. That's not a customer service dispute. That's criminal conduct." "Please." Victoria's voice broke completely. "Please don't do this. I'll apologize publicly. I'll do whatever you want. Just please don't fire me." "What I want," Marcus's voice was quiet but carried absolute authority, "is for you to understand something. This isn't about revenge. This is about consequences. You wielded power over someone you thought was powerless. You used your authority to humiliate someone you thought had no recourse, and you felt completely justified doing it because you believed you'd never face accountability. But you were wrong." Marcus continued. "Wrong about who I was. Wrong about what I could do. Wrong about the consequences you'd face." He checked his watch, a simple digital Casio that probably cost $60, not the luxury timepiece Victoria might have expected a billionaire to wear. "You have 2 minutes, Ms. Ashford." 2 minutes for what Victoria's voice was barely audible. 2 minutes to gather your personal belongings from this aircraft and leave. Marcus's tone was final. "You are terminated from Skybridge Airlines, effective immediately." The words landed like bombs in the silent cabin. "You can't just fire me like this." Victoria's voice rose in desperation. "I have rights. I have seniority. I have 14 years of service." "You had 14 years of service," Marcus corrected. "And you just threw them away with 25 minutes of prejudice." Robert Kim was still recording his phone, capturing every second. Patricia Donovan had tears streaming down her face, though hers seemed to be tears of justice rather than fear. The businessman in 3A looked like he was witnessing something he'd tell people about for the rest of his life. Captain Walsh Marcus said, his voice shifting from confrontation to command. "Make a note. Victoria Ashford Senior Purser terminated for cause effective 1:23 a.m., falsifying security threats, racial profiling, and making false statements to law enforcement officials." Captain Walsh's hands shook as she pulled out her own tablet, making the notation with fingers that could barely tap the screen. "Yes, sir, Mr. Bennett." Marcus turned back to Victoria. 1 minute and 30 seconds. Victoria looked around the cabin, desperately searching for allies, for support for someone who might intervene on her behalf. She found none of it. Every passenger was either recording her downfall or looking away in embarrassment. The police officers were pretending to be invisible. Sophia was crying. Captain Walsh was making termination notes. She was completely alone. "Please," the word came out as barely a whisper. "I'm begging you. I can't lose everything. You should have thought about that." Marcus's voice was cold before you decided that a black man in a hoodie couldn't possibly belong in first class. 30 seconds, he added his tone, making it clear that no amount of begging would change his mind. Victoria Ashford's 14-year career was over, and everyone in the cabin knew it. Robert Kim stood up from seat 2, his phone still recording live stream viewer count, now pushing 4 million as the video spread across social media platforms like wildfire. He looked directly at Marcus, his voice clear and carrying. "Mr. Bennett, I'm Robert Kim, tech entrepreneur. I've been recording everything that happened here tonight, and I'm streaming live to about 4.2 million people right now." His tone shifted from introduction to witness testimony. "The whole world just watched what she did to you." Marcus nodded acknowledgement. "Thank you, Mr. Kim. I appreciate the documentation." "For what it's worth," Robert's voice was firm, "she never asked anyone else in this cabin for their boarding pass. Not me, not Mrs. Donovan, not the businessman in 3A, not the couple in 4A to B. Not anyone. Just you. And I've got it all on video. The whole confrontation from the moment she woke you up until now. Patricia Donovan stood as well, her voice carrying the kind of moral authority that comes from 7 decades of watching injustice and finally deciding that silence is complicity. That's absolutely right. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her voice was steady. I'm 73 years old. I've been flying since before you were born, young man, and I have never seen anything so disgraceful in my life. She pointed at Victoria with one finger. This woman woke you up from a sound sleep, demanded your papers like you were some kind of criminal, called the police on you for the crime of existing in a seat you paid for. And when people tried to tell her she was wrong, she just doubled down, got meaner, more aggressive. Patricia's voice was rising now, emotion breaking through. My granddaughter's going to see this video. My granddaughter who's been told she can be anything, go anywhere, that America has changed. And she's going to watch a black man get arrested for sleeping in first class, and she's going to ask me why. And I'm going to have to explain that some people, she glared at Victoria, some people still judge by skin color instead of character. The businessman from 3A spoke up, his voice carrying the kind of corporate authority that suggested he was used to boardrooms and difficult conversations. I'm David Foster, General Counsel for Morrison Tech. I've been a lawyer for 20 years, and what I just witnessed was textbook racial profiling followed by false statements to law enforcement. His voice was clinical, professional. If I were still practicing, I'd take this case in a heartbeat. Clear liability, multiple witnesses, video evidence. This is the kind of discrimination case that changes policy. The young woman from 3B who'd been silent throughout the entire confrontation found her voice. I recorded it too. Her voice was soft but determined. Posted it to TikTok about 10 minutes ago. Already has 800,000 views and climbing. She looked at Victoria with disgust. Everyone's going to know what you did. Everyone. More passengers spoke up, their voices overlapping a middle-aged woman from 5A. This is exactly why we need better training, better accountability. This can't keep happening. A young man from 6A. I fly this route every week for work. If the airline doesn't take serious action, I'm switching carriers. I won't support a company that allows this. An elderly man from 7B. Shameful. Absolutely shameful. That young man showed more grace under pressure than most people could manage. Marcus listened to each person, his expression neutral, but his eyes showing something that might have been gratitude. These were strangers, people who had nothing to gain from speaking up, who could have stayed silent, who could have looked away and pretended they hadn't witnessed what they'd witnessed. But they'd chosen to speak, chosen to be witnesses instead of bystanders, chosen to make their voices heard. Do you see this? Ms. Ashford Marcus's voice cut through the overlapping testimonies. These are witnesses, real people who watched you profile me, harass me, lie about me, have me arrested, for sleeping in a seat I paid for. He gestured to the phones recording from multiple angles. And it's all documented, from every angle, with timestamps and metadata and live witnesses. You can't explain this away. Can't claim it was a misunderstanding. Can't say I was actually being aggressive or threatening or non-compliant. His voice dropped lower, more intense. Because the truth is on camera. And truth doesn't care about your 14 years of seniority or your carefully maintained standards or your beliefs about who belongs where. Victoria had no response. Just stood there crying, mascara running down her face, her carefully constructed image of sophisticated professionalism completely destroyed. Sophia Martinez still crying. Herself spoke up in a small voice. Mr. Bennett, I'm so sorry. Her words were barely audible. I knew it was wrong. I told her you probably used miles to upgrade. I suggested she check the manifest. I tried to say something was off about the whole situation, but she made me call security anyway, and I was too scared to refuse. Marcus looked at the young flight attendant with an expression that softened slightly. "I heard you, Sophia." His voice was gentler now. "I heard you trying to defend me. I heard you questioning her judgment." That took courage. Sophia looked up, surprised, hopeful, but Marcus's attention shifted back to Victoria. "And we'll get to you in a moment, Ms. Martinez. First, we need to finish with your former supervisor." The word former hit Victoria like a physical blow. "1 minute," Marcus said, checking his watch again. "Gather your things and go." Senator Andrew Mitchell, having reclaimed his seat in 1B after his brief and cowardly retreat, now saw an opportunity to salvage his image and, perhaps, gain some political capital from this situation. He stood up, adjusting his expensive suit jacket, and addressed Marcus with the practiced gravitas of someone who'd spent 3 terms giving speeches and making pronouncements. "Mr. Bennett, if I may." His voice carried the kind of authority that was used to being listened to. "I think what we've witnessed here tonight goes beyond a single employee's poor judgment. This speaks to larger issues within the airline industry that require legislative attention." Marcus turned to look at the senator, his expression neutral, but his eyes suggesting he could see right through the political maneuvering. "I've already instructed my staff." Senator Mitchell continued warming to his subject to begin drafting legislation that would mandate bias training for all airline personnel, create stronger protections for passengers who face discrimination, and establish an independent review board for passenger complaints. "That's very ambitious, Senator." Marcus's tone was perfectly polite and completely skeptical. "Will this legislation have actual enforcement mechanisms, or will it be another feel-good bill with no teeth?" Senator Mitchell looked slightly taken aback at being questioned so directly. "I assure you, Mr. Bennett, I'm committed to meaningful reform. What happened to you tonight is unacceptable and, with respect." Senator Marcus cut him off smoothly. "What happened to me tonight happens to black travelers every day, in airports, on aircraft, at hotels and restaurants. The difference is that most of those people don't own the company, don't have millions of people watching on livestream, don't have the resources to fight back." The senator nodded, trying to look thoughtful and concerned. "So, when you talk about legislative action," Marcus continued, "I want to know, will your bill protect the college student in economy who gets profiled by a flight attendant? Will it protect the businessman whose credentials are questioned because he doesn't look like someone's mental image of success? Or will it just be political theater designed to generate good press without actually changing anything?" Senator Mitchell's practiced smile faltered slightly. "Mr. Bennett, I understand your skepticism, but I give you my word that—" "Your word." Marcus's tone was dry. "The same word you gave when you saw what was happening and decided to leave the aircraft rather than speak up more forcefully." The senator flushed red. "That was a momentary lapse in judgment, and I've already apologized." "Apologies don't change culture, Senator." Marcus's voice was firm, but not hostile. "Actions do. Policy does. Accountability does. So yes, draft your legislation. Hold your hearings. Make your speeches. But make sure they lead to actual change, not just headlines." He leaned forward slightly. "Because I'll be watching, and so will the 4 million people on Mr. Kim's live stream. And if your legislative efforts turn out to be empty promises, we'll make sure everyone knows it." Senator Mitchell looked like he wanted to respond, wanted to reassert his authority and gravitas, but something in Marcus's expression suggested that arguing would be a very bad idea. Instead, he nodded stiffly and sat back down, his aide immediately leaning in to whisper what was probably damage control strategy. Marcus had made his point. Politicians who showed up after the fight was over didn't get to claim credit for the victory. Real change required people who were willing to stand up when it was hard, not just when it was politically convenient. And everyone in the cabin had just witnessed a masterclass in holding power accountable. Marcus Bennett stood in the center of the first-class cabin with the kind of natural authority that didn't come from shouting or intimidation, but from the absolute certainty that every person in this space was about to listen to what he had to say. The purple mood lighting that had been designed to create a relaxing atmosphere now cast everything in a strange, surreal glow. The kind of lighting that suggested nothing about this moment was normal or routine or forgettable. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner of the cabin with perfect clarity. I apologize for the delay and the disturbing scene you've witnessed tonight. This is not the standard of service Skybridge Airlines will represent going forward. Passengers who'd been watching in shocked silence now leaned forward, eager to hear what would happen next. Robert Kim adjusted his phone angle to capture Marcus. Clearly, his viewer count now approaching 5 million as the video spread across every social media platform simultaneously. Some of you may be wondering why I didn't just show my identification immediately and avoid this entire situation. Marcus's tone was conversational, almost contemplative. The answer is simple. I wanted to see what would happen when someone in power thought I had none. He paused, letting that sink in. This is not the first time I've been judged by my appearance. Followed in stores, questioned at hotel desks, pulled over for driving a nice car in the wrong neighborhood. Most of the time, I show my credentials, my Centurion card, my corporate ID, my business card, and watch people's attitudes change instantly. His expression hardened slightly. But that doesn't fix the problem. It just teaches people to profile more carefully, to make sure they've identified the right black people before they discriminate against the wrong ones. Robert Kim spoke up from 2A. What are you going to do about it? Marcus turned to face the tech entrepreneur. Starting tomorrow morning, every Skybridge employee will undergo comprehensive bias training, not a checkbox exercise where you watch a video and sign a form. Real training, difficult conversations, role-playing exercises, outside facilitators who specialize in confronting prejudice. He looked directly at the camera on Robert's phone, knowing that millions were watching. I'm establishing an anonymous hotline for passengers and employees to report discrimination. Every report will be investigated by an independent third party, not internal HR, not company lawyers, but actual independent investigators with no stake in protecting the company's image. Patricia Donovan spoke up from 2B. Good for you, young man. It's about time someone took a real stand. Marcus nodded acknowledgement before continuing. I'm implementing a zero-tolerance policy. Anyone found engaging in racial profiling will be terminated. No warnings, no performance improvement plans, no second chances. Because discrimination isn't a training issue or a coaching opportunity. It's a choice. And people who make that choice don't belong in positions where they can harm others. The businessman from 3A raised his hand slightly. What about union protections, labor agreements? I've reviewed every collective bargaining agreement we have. Marcus's voice was firm. And they all contain provisions for termination due to gross misconduct. Making false statements to law enforcement, creating security threats against passengers, racial profiling, all of those constitute gross misconduct that supersedes normal termination procedures. He turned his attention back to Victoria, who was still gripping the galley counter like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Ms. Ashford, the 2 minutes I gave you have passed. Victoria's voice was broken, desperate. Please, you're destroying my life. I made a mistake. One mistake in 14 years. Doesn't that count for something? Marcus's expression didn't soften. One mistake. Let me ask you something, Ms. Ashford. How many other passengers have you profiled over those 14 years? How many other black travelers did you question? How many other people did you make feel unwelcome in spaces they had every right to occupy? Victoria opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The difference between today and all those other times, Marcus continued, is that today You profiled someone with the power to hold you accountable, someone with resources to fight back, someone who owns the company you work for. He took a step closer. But what about all the times you did this to people who couldn't fight back, the passengers who didn't want to make a scene, who were too tired to argue, who just wanted to get home without being treated like criminals? His voice dropped lower, more intense. Those people matter too, Ms. Ashford. And the fact that you got away with treating them poorly for 14 years doesn't make this one incident forgivable. It makes it worse, because it means you've been doing this for years without consequence. Sophia Martinez, who'd been standing silently near the beverage cart, suddenly spoke up. Her voice was shaking, but determined. She did do this to other people. I've seen it. Her eyes were red from crying, but she stood straighter. In the 6 months I've been flying with her, I've watched her question black passengers about their tickets. I've seen her demand documentation she doesn't ask from white passengers. I've heard her make comments about who belongs in first class. Victoria whirled on Sophia. You have no right. I have every right. Sophia's voice rose, all the fear and uncertainty gone, replaced by righteous anger. I stayed quiet because I needed this job. Because I was afraid of you. But I watched you make people feel small and unwelcome, and I said nothing. And I'm done saying nothing. She turned to Marcus. I should have spoken up earlier. Should have done more than just suggest you check the manifest. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you when it mattered most. Marcus looked at the young flight attendant with something like respect. You did speak up, Sophia. You questioned her judgment. You tried to suggest alternatives. That takes courage when you're 23 years old and 6 months into a job you desperately need. Victoria made one last desperate attempt. I'll resign. She was crying openly now, mascara creating dark tracks down her cheeks. I'll leave quietly. You won't have to fire me. Just let me resign with some dignity and tact. No. Marcus's voice was final. Because resignation lets you control the narrative. Lets you tell future employers that you left by choice. Lets you avoid accountability for what you did. He pulled out his phone again, showing her the recording app still running. I have 38 minutes of audio. Every word you said, every lie you told, every false accusation you made. That's going in your personnel file. That's going to be part of the official record. So when people ask why you were fired, the truth will be there in black and white. Captain Walsh Marcus said, turning to the chief pilot. Make sure the termination documentation is thorough. Include the audio recording. Include the video evidence from Mr. Kim and the other passengers. Include witness statements from everyone in this cabin who wants to provide one. I want this so well documented that there's no possible legal challenge. Captain Walsh nodded her fingers, already moving across her tablet screen. Yes, sir, Mr. Bennett. I'll personally oversee the documentation. Victoria looked around one final time, searching for any ally, any supporter, anyone who might speak on her behalf. She found nothing but cold stares, recording phones, and witnesses to her downfall. 45 seconds. Ms. Ashford. Marcus checked his watch. Then I call security to remove you for trespassing. And unlike my experience with handcuffs, I guarantee they won't be gentle about it. The threat hung in the air. The same security she'd called on Marcus would now be used to remove her. The same humiliation she'd tried to inflict on him would now be visited upon her. Poetic justice. Victoria stumbled toward the crew storage area, her legs barely supporting her weight, and grabbed her purse and winter coat with trembling hands. Her perfect French twist had come completely undone, blonde hair falling in messy strands around her face. Her designer scarf was askew. Her makeup was ruined. The sophisticated, elegant senior purser who'd ruled first-class cabins for 14 years looked like someone who'd just lost everything. Because she had. Victoria Ashford walked toward the aircraft exit on legs that threatened to give out with every step, clutching her purse and coat to her chest like they were shields that might protect her from what was happening. Each step toward the door felt like walking toward an execution, and in a way it was. The execution of her career, her identity, her sense of self. She paused at the entrance, looking back one last time at the first-class cabin that had been her domain for 8 years. The leather seats she'd protected, the passengers she'd served, the standards she'd maintained. Everything she'd worked for was being taken away in minutes, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Captain Walsh. Her voice was small, broken. Please, don't let him do this. We've worked together for years. You know I'm not a bad person. You know I care about this airline. Captain Walsh looked at her former colleague with an expression that combined pity and disgust. Victoria, I watched the whole thing on cabin security cameras, from the moment you woke him up until now. She shook her head slowly. He's right. You profiled him. You lied about him. You had him arrested for being black in first class. That's not what this was about. Victoria's voice rose in desperation. Then what was it about Captain Walsh's tone was sharp. Explain to me why you questioned his credentials and no one else's. Explain why you called him aggressive when he was sleeping. Explain why you told officers he was threatening when all he did was exist in a seat he paid for. Victoria had no answer. Just sobs. Sophia Martinez, standing near the beverage cart with tears still on her face but fire in her eyes, spoke up. Ms. Ashford, when you trained me, you said first class was about maintaining standards, about knowing who belongs. You said I'd develop an instinct for it. She paused, her voice getting stronger. What you really meant was that I should judge people by how they look, by what they're wearing, by the color of their skin. You taught me that prejudice was professionalism, that discrimination was doing my job well. Sophia looked at Marcus. I almost believed you, almost thought that was normal. That was how aviation worked. But watching Mr. Bennett tonight, watching him stay calm while you treated him like a criminal, watching him demand dignity instead of just proving he deserved it, that taught me more about professionalism than 6 months of your training ever did. Victoria looked at the young flight attendant she'd been mentoring, seeing another ally lost. Please, Sophia. You know how hard this job is. You know how much pressure we're under. Stop using pressure as an excuse for prejudice. Sophia cut her off. I'm under pressure too. I'm 23 with student loans and rent and a job I need to keep. But I'm not going to treat people like garbage and call it maintaining standards. Robert Kim lowered his phone slightly, though it was still recording. Ms. Ashford, you asked earlier what I do. I'm the founder of a tech company worth about $800 million. I show up to board meetings in hoodies and sneakers. My investors don't care what I wear. They care about returns. He gestured to his casual clothes. If you'd seen me sleeping in this seat, would you have woken me up and demanded my boarding pass? Would you have called the cops on me? Victoria couldn't answer. They both knew the truth. That's what racism looks like. Robert continued. Not burning crosses or slurs, just different standards for different people, just assumptions about who belongs where based on skin color. Patricia Donovan stood up one more time, her voice carrying the weight of 7 decades. Young woman, I'm going to tell you something my mother told me in 1963 when I was marching in Washington. She pointed one finger at Victoria. You don't get to be a little bit racist. You don't get to discriminate just a little. You don't get to say, I didn't mean it that way when your actions harm people. Because the people you harm don't care about your intentions. They care about the pain you cause. The elderly woman's voice softened slightly. You could have apologized, could have acknowledged your mistake when people started speaking up, could have backed down with grace and learned something, but instead you doubled down, got meaner, called the police, lied about this man to protect your ego. Patricia shook her head sadly. That's not a mistake. That's a choice, and choices have consequences. Marcus had stood silently through these testimonies, letting other voices speak, letting Victoria hear from the passengers she'd thought would support her. Now he spoke again, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. One more thing, Miss Ashford. Victoria turned to face him, mascara-streaked face showing she knew more bad news was coming. The scarf. Marcus gestured to the Hermes silk scarf still tied around her neck. Leave it. Victoria's hand went instinctively to the fabric fingers touching the smooth silk that had been part of her uniform for 14 years. What that scarf represents? Skybridge Airlines. Marcus's tone was matter-of-fact. That logo stands for hospitality, service, dignity, and respect. You don't represent those values anymore. This scarf was a gift. Victoria's voice cracked. After 10 years of service, it was special. It means something to me. It meant you had earned trust. Marcus's voice was cold. And you destroyed that trust tonight. You don't get to keep the symbol of something you betrayed. With trembling fingers that could barely make them work, Victoria untied the scarf from around her neck. The silk slipped through her fingers, and for a moment she just held it, staring at the company logo she'd worn with pride for so many years. Then she placed it on the beverage cart, watching as it slipped off the stainless steel surface and fell to the cabin floor. Navy blue silk against gray carpet. Such a small thing. Just a piece of fabric. But somehow it represented everything she'd lost. You can go now. Marcus's voice was final, allowing no argument. Victoria Ashford walked through the aircraft door without another word. No goodbye to Sophia, who she'd been training. No farewell to Captain Walsh, who she'd worked with for years. No acknowledgement of the passengers who'd witnessed her downfall. Just the clicking of her heels on the jet bridge floor. Getting quieter, fading, and then gone. The cabin was silent for a long moment after she disappeared. Then someone started clapping. Slowly at first. Patricia Donovan, her hands coming together in deliberate applause. Others joined. Robert Kim, the businessman from 3A, the young couple from 6A to B. More passengers throughout the cabin, not celebrating someone losing their job, celebrating justice, celebrating accountability, celebrating the idea that actions have consequences and power can be held responsible. Marcus didn't smile, didn't acknowledge the applause, just picked up the fallen scarf from the floor, folded it carefully, and handed it to Captain Walsh. Make sure this gets returned to uniform services. His voice was professional controlled. Someone else will wear it, someone who understands what it actually represents. The applause faded, leaving the cabin in expectant silence. Everyone was watching Marcus, waiting to see what would happen next. The villain had been vanquished, but the story wasn't over yet. Marcus turned his attention to Sophia Martinez, who stood near the galley looking like she expected to be the next person fired. Her face was still tear-stained, her hands still trembling, her entire body radiating the kind of fear that comes from watching your supervisor destroyed and wondering if you're next. Ms. Martinez. Marcus's voice was gentle, so different from the cold authority he'd used with Victoria. Could you come here, please? Sophia walked forward on unsteady legs, her eyes red from crying. Yes, sir. How long have you been flying with Skybridge? Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. 6 months, sir. Her voice was barely above a whisper. And what did you think when Ms. Ashford asked you to call security? Sophia's voice cracked as she answered. I thought it was wrong. I told her you might have used miles to upgrade. I suggested she double-check the manifest. I tried to tell her something felt wrong about the whole situation. Tears started flowing again. But she was my supervisor. She had 14 years of experience. I've only been flying 6 months. I was afraid if I refused her direct order I'd lose my job. So I made the call even though every instinct told me it was wrong. She looked at Marcus with genuine anguish. I'm so sorry. I should have done more. Should have refused. Should have stood up for you. But I was scared and new, and I didn't know how to stop. Marcus held up a hand, cutting off her self-recrimination. You did more than you think. I heard you questioning her judgment. I heard you trying to suggest alternatives. I heard you pushing back even when she shut you down." Sophia looked surprised. "You heard that I heard everything." Marcus's voice was kind. "And what you did, questioning someone who outranked you by 14 years, suggesting she might be wrong, trying to de-escalate the situation that took real courage." He looked at Captain Walsh. "Captain, what's the typical timeline for a flight attendant to be promoted to senior purser?" "Usually 5 to 7 years," Captain Walsh answered, watching Marcus with growing understanding of where this was going. "Requires demonstrated leadership, excellent customer service scores, and completion of advanced training programs." Marcus nodded. "Ms. Martinez, you're promoted to senior purser effective immediately." Sophia's eyes widened in shock. What? "Sir, I'm not qualified. I've only been flying 6 months. I don't have the experience or the training to—" "You have the most important qualification." Marcus's voice was firm. "You saw injustice happening and you tried to stop it. You questioned authority when it was wrong. You spoke truth even when it was risky." He looked around the cabin at all the passengers watching. "That's the qualification that matters most. Not years of service, not technical skills, not knowing the perfect way to fold a scarf. The ability to recognize right from wrong and choose right even when it's hard." Captain Walsh was already making notes on her tablet, a small smile on her face. "Mr. Bennett, I'll make the notation immediately, and I'd like to recommend Miss Martinez for our management fast-track program." "Good." Marcus nodded approval. "Enroll her starting next month. And Captain, I want Sophia involved in developing the new bias training program. She understands what subtle discrimination looks like because she was being taught to do it. That perspective is valuable." Sophia looked overwhelmed, tears flowing again, but this time from relief and gratitude rather than fear. "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down. I know you won't." Marcus's tone was confident. "Now, could you please get me that ginger ale I asked for about 40 minutes ago? I'm incredibly thirsty and it's been a very long night." The simple request, so mundane after everything that had happened, broke the tension in the cabin. Several passengers laughed. Sophia smiled through her tears and hurried to prepare the drink with hands that were finally starting to steady. Robert Kim spoke up from 2A. "That's leadership right there. Holding people accountable for wrong while rewarding people for right. My followers are eating this up." Marcus turned to the tech entrepreneur. "Mr. Kim, how many people are watching now?" Robert checked his phone. "Just past 6 million. This is the most viewed live stream in my platform's history. And it's trending #1 on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. Basically everywhere." Marcus nodded slowly. "Good. Let people see what accountability looks like. Let them see that discrimination has consequences. And let them see that speaking up against injustice gets rewarded instead of punished." Sophia returned with the ginger ale, presenting it on a small napkin with the kind of careful attention to detail that suggested she was already thinking like a senior purser. "Thank you, Sophia." Marcus accepted the drink with genuine warmth. "Now let's get this flight departed. We've delayed these passengers long enough." Captain Walsh headed to the flight deck to begin final preparations. Sophia moved through the cabin with newfound confidence, checking that passengers were settled. The businessman in 3A closed his laptop, finally ready to relax. Patricia Donovan smiled warmly at Marcus. And slowly, impossibly, the cabin began to feel normal again. Except nothing would ever be quite normal again. Not after tonight. Marcus stood in the center of the first-class cabin, and when he spoke, his voice carried to every passenger with the kind of natural authority that didn't need amplification. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize again for the significant delay and the disturbing scene you witnessed tonight." He made eye contact with passengers throughout the cabin as he spoke. This is absolutely not the standard of service Skybridge Airlines will represent going forward. Not under my ownership. Not ever again. The cabin was silent except for his voice, every passenger listening intently. Some of you may be wondering why I didn't just show my identification immediately and avoid this entire confrontation. His tone was thoughtful, almost conversational. The answer is that I needed to see what would happen when someone in authority thought I had no power, no recourse, no ability to fight back. He paused, letting that sink in. This isn't the first time I've been judged by my appearance, followed in department stores by security who assumed I was shoplifting, questioned at hotel front desks about whether my reservation was really mine, pulled over in nice neighborhoods for the crime of driving while black, asked to show ID in buildings I own. Marcus's voice stayed level factual. Most of the time I pull out my American Express Centurion card or mention Bennett Capital Group or show some credential that proves I belong in whatever space I'm occupying. And I watch attitudes change instantly, watch suspicion transform into apology, watch people scramble to make up for their assumptions. He looked directly at Robert Kim's camera, knowing millions were watching. But that doesn't fix anything. It just teaches people to profile more carefully, to make sure they've identified the right kind of black person before they discriminate against the wrong kind. Robert Kim spoke up. So what are you going to do about it? Marcus turned to face him directly. Starting tomorrow morning, every Skybridge employee undergoes comprehensive bias training. Not watching a video and checking a box. Real training. Uncomfortable conversations. Role-playing difficult scenarios. Outside facilitators who specialize in confronting prejudice. He continued, his voice gaining strength. I'm establishing an anonymous hotline for passengers and employees to report discrimination. Every report gets investigated by independent third parties. Not internal HR trying to protect the company, but actual investigators with no stake in the outcome. Patricia Donovan spoke up. Will there be real consequences? Or is this just public relations? Real consequences. Marcus's voice was firm. Zero tolerance for racial profiling. Anyone found engaging in discrimination will be terminated. No warnings. No performance improvement plans. No second chances. The businessman from 3A raised his hand slightly. What about union protections? Every collective bargaining agreement has provisions for gross misconduct. Marcus had clearly thought this through. Making false statements to law enforcement, fabricating security threats, racial profiling, those all qualify. And the documentation from tonight will be thorough enough to withstand any legal challenge. He looked around at all the passengers. But this isn't just about one flight attendant or one incident. This is about changing a culture that allowed someone to work for 14 years while treating passengers differently based on skin color. A culture where nobody questioned it, nobody reported it, nobody held her accountable until she profiled someone with the power to fight back. Senator Mitchell stood up, unable to resist, inserting himself into the conversation. Mr. Bennett, as I mentioned earlier, you'll have congressional support for industry-wide reforms. We can hold hearings, draft legislation. With respect, Senator Marcus cut him off smoothly. I don't need hearings or legislation to change how my airline operates. I need commitment. I need employees who understand that every passenger deserves dignity. I need a culture where speaking up against discrimination is rewarded instead of punished. He gestured toward Sophia, who was arranging champagne glasses with careful precision. That's why I promoted Ms. Martinez, not because she has the most experience or the most technical skills, because she questioned authority when authority was wrong, because she tried to de-escalate a situation that shouldn't have started in the first place. Marcus's voice filled the cabin. That's the culture I'm building, where courage matters more than seniority, where doing the right thing is valued over maintaining standards that are just prejudice in disguise. A young woman from 5B spoke up nervously. What about passengers? What can we do? Speak up. Marcus's answer was immediate. When you see someone being treated unfairly, don't stay silent. Don't look away. Don't assume someone else will handle it. He gestured to Robert, Patricia, and the other passengers who'd defended him. These people didn't know me. Didn't know I owned the airline. Didn't know there would be consequences for Victoria or rewards for speaking up. They saw injustice and chose to be witnesses instead of bystanders. That's what changes culture. The cabin was silent for a moment, processing everything he'd said. Captain Walsh's voice came over the PA system. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Walsh. We're finally ready for departure. I apologize for the extended delay. Your patience during this unusual situation is greatly appreciated. She paused, then continued. I'd also like to say that what you witnessed tonight represents everything wrong with how we've sometimes operated in the past, and everything right about where we're heading in the future. Mr. Bennett has my full support in implementing changes that will make Skybridge Airlines a leader in passenger dignity and respect. As the PA clicked off, Marcus made his way back to seat 1. Finally able to sink into the leather that had been at the center of so much controversy, Sophia appeared beside him with a warm towel and fresh glass of water. Is there anything else I can get you, Mr. Bennett? Marcus looked up at the young flight attendant with genuine warmth. Just some peace and quiet, Sophia. I'd really like to sleep now. Of course, sir. Sophia dimmed his reading light and moved quietly away. Her movements showing the kind of genuine care that hospitality should always include. The aircraft pushed back from the gate. Finally. 2 hours late, but carrying a load far heavier than passengers and luggage, carrying the weight of change, of accountability, of justice. And Marcus Bennett, exhausted beyond measure, closed his eyes and let sleep finally claim him. This time undisturbed, the Boeing 787 pushed back from Gate 23 at 2:47 a.m., exactly 2 hours and 14 minutes behind schedule. The auxiliary power unit hummed steadily as the ground crew disconnected the jetway and external power. Inside the cabin, the purple mood lighting finally felt appropriate again, calming rather than ominous. Marcus Bennett reclined in seat 1, eyes closed, noise-canceling earbuds back in place, finally able to access the sleep his body so desperately needed. The leather seat cradled him comfortably, and for the first time in 72 hours, his mind began to quiet. No more contract negotiations, no more lawyers arguing over clause language, no more board presentations or due diligence meetings or the 1,000 small decisions that had consumed him for 18 months. Just sleep. Finally. Sophia Martinez moved through the first-class cabin with quiet efficiency, checking that passengers were settled for takeoff. Her movements were more confident now, her earlier trembling replaced by the kind of purposeful grace that suggested she was already growing into her unexpected promotion. She paused at each row, making eye contact, offering a genuine smile that didn't feel forced or performative. This was what hospitality looked like when it came from a place of actual care, rather than maintaining appearances. Robert Kim had finally put down his phone after posting a wrap-up message to his 6.2 million viewers. The live stream had ended, but the video would live forever on the internet, shared and reshared, dissected and discussed, becoming part of the larger conversation about discrimination and accountability. His last message had been simple. Real change happened tonight, not because of protest or legislation or social pressure, because one man refused to accept discrimination quietly and a company owner chose accountability over protecting his brand. This is what justice looks like. Patricia Donovan was reading a novel, though she kept glancing at Marcus's peaceful face with the kind of maternal satisfaction that suggested she'd witnessed something important, something that gave her hope for her granddaughter's future. The businessman from 3A was working on his laptop again, but every few minutes he'd look up at seat 1A and shake his head slightly, still processing what he'd witnessed. He'd already drafted an email to his own company's HR department about reviewing their bias training programs. Senator Mitchell sat in 1B, his aide beside him in 1C, both of them quietly strategizing about how to position the senator's involvement in tonight's events. They were politicians, after all. Every moment was an opportunity if you framed it correctly. But even they seemed subdued, aware that Marcus had seen through their political calculation and found it wanting. Captain Walsh's voice came through the PA system one final time before takeoff. "Ladies and gentlemen from the flight deck, this is Captain Walsh. We've been cleared for departure. Flight time to Chicago will be approximately 2 hours and 50 minutes. Weather looks smooth, so we're expecting a comfortable ride." She paused, her tone shifting slightly. "I want to thank every passenger in this cabin for your patience tonight, and for being witnesses to something that needed to happen. What Mr. Bennett did tonight, holding us accountable, demanding we be better. That's the kind of leadership that will make Skybridge Airlines better for everyone." The PA clicked off. The aircraft began to taxi, the gentle rumble of movement finally signaling that this extraordinary night was transitioning into something more normal. The engines spooled up with their characteristic whine building power for takeoff. Sophia had taken the jump seat near the galley, her eyes bright despite the late hour and emotional exhaustion. She caught Captain Walsh's eye through the open cockpit door and saw the older woman give her a thumbs up and an encouraging smile. 6 months ago, Sophia had started this job terrified of making mistakes, desperate to prove herself worthy, willing to follow orders even when they felt wrong. Tonight, she'd learned that sometimes the most important part of professionalism was knowing when to question the professional. The 787 reached the runway, paused for final clearance, then surged forward with the smooth, powerful acceleration of modern aviation. The nose lifted. The main gear left the ground, and Skybridge Flight 1847 climbed into the dark sky above New York, carrying its passengers and its cargo of change toward Chicago. In Seat 1A, Marcus Bennett slept deeply, his breathing slow and even, his face finally peaceful. He'd spent 18 months acquiring this airline. He'd spent 72 hours closing the deal. And he'd spent 2 hours tonight fundamentally changing its culture. Now he could rest. The aircraft banked gently west, leaving behind the lights of New York, and heading toward the dawn that would break before they landed. A new day, a new direction, a new standard. And Marcus Bennett, sleeping peacefully in first class, had made it happen without ever raising his voice or losing his dignity. That was real power. 8 months after that extraordinary night at JFK, Marcus Bennett sat in seat 28C of Skybridge Flight 447 from Atlanta to Denver wearing a gray hoodie and the same comfortable Nike Air Max sneakers that had started everything. His laptop was open on the tray table, displaying quarterly reports that showed customer satisfaction scores at all-time highs and discrimination complaints down 94%. But numbers only told part of the story. Marcus needed to see if the change was real. So he did what he'd been doing every few weeks since taking ownership, flying his own airline incognito, dressed casually, observing how passengers were actually treated when nobody knew the boss was watching. The flight attendant working economy was Carlos Rivera, 26 years old, Hispanic with 2 years at Skybridge. Carlos had absolutely no idea that the passenger in 28C wearing a hoodie and jeans was the CEO who owned the entire airline, and that was exactly the point. "Can I get you anything to drink, sir?" Carlos's voice was warm, genuine, his smile reaching his eyes in a way that suggested he actually cared about the answer. "Just water, thanks." Marcus looked up from his laptop, making eye contact. "Of course." Ice Carlos's tone suggested the question mattered, that passenger preference was worth asking about rather than assuming. "Please." Marcus watched as Carlos moved through the cabin, treating every passenger with the same authentic warmth. The businessman in 27A, wearing an expensive suit, got the same courtesy as the college student in 28A, wearing pajama pants. The elderly woman in 29B with her service dog received the same attention as the young mother in 30C trying to manage two small children. No profiling, no judgment, no subtle differences in tone or body language that suggested some passengers mattered more than others. Just genuine hospitality extended to everyone equally. After the flight landed and passengers began deplaning, Marcus approached Carlos near the exit. "Excuse me, Carlos." The flight attendant turned with a friendly smile. "Yes, sir. Did you need something?" "I just wanted to say you did an excellent job on this flight. Really professional." Carlos looked surprised and pleased. "Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. We don't always get direct feedback from passengers, so that means a lot." "Can I ask you something?" Marcus kept his tone casual, curious. "The training program Skybridge implemented last year, the bias awareness workshops. What did you think of them?" Carlos's eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "Honestly, they were incredible. Not what I expected at all. Most corporate training is just checking boxes, you know. Sit through a presentation, sign a form, forget everything the next day." He leaned against the doorframe, warming to the subject. But this was different. They brought in this woman named Victoria Ashford who used to work for the airline. She shared her story about making assumptions about a passenger based on appearance and what it cost her. Like her whole career ended because she let prejudice override professionalism. Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly. "Victoria Ashford works for the training program." "Yeah, she's one of the lead facilitators." Carlos nodded enthusiastically. "And you can tell it's painful for her to relive that story every single session. She doesn't sugarcoat it, doesn't make excuses. Just honestly talks about how she destroyed her own career by discriminating against someone and how she wishes she could go back and make different choices." Marcus was genuinely surprised. He'd terminated Victoria, yes, but he'd assumed she would disappear, find another airline, maybe move to a different industry entirely. The idea that she'd chosen to face what she'd done to use her failure to teach others was unexpected. "She's really the best part of the training," Carlos continued. "Some of the other facilitators are fine, but you can tell they're just reading slides. Victoria actually makes you think about your own biases, makes you uncomfortable in a good way." He lowered his voice slightly. "Between you and me after her session, I realized I'd been making assumptions too. Not about race exactly, but about age, about appearance, about who I thought would tip well or be difficult to deal with. And I started questioning those assumptions, started treating everyone the same regardless of what my brain was telling me to assume. That's exactly what the training should do." Marcus smiled. "Thank you for sharing that." Of course, Carlos straightened his uniform, always happy to talk about Skybridge. This company really changed after the new owner took over. The culture is completely different now. Better. Different how Marcus was genuinely curious. Carlos thought for a moment. It feels like people matter more than policy now. Like we're encouraged to use judgment and empathy instead of just following rules. And there's this understanding that if we see something wrong, discrimination, harassment, safety issues, anything, we're supposed to speak up, not stay quiet. He smiled. Last month, I saw another flight attendant being dismissive to a passenger with a disability. Old me would have stayed silent, figured it wasn't my business. But new me. I pulled her aside after the flight had an honest conversation about it. And she thanked me. Said nobody had ever given her that kind of feedback before, and she'd genuinely not realized how she was coming across. That's leadership. Marcus's voice carried genuine approval. Speaking up when something's wrong, even when it's uncomfortable. That's what they teach us now. Carlos nodded. Culture change happens person by person, choice by choice. We've all got that basically memorized. Marcus thanked Carlos again and headed into the Denver terminal, his mind processing this new information about Victoria. He pulled out his phone and sent a text to the HR director. Schedule a call for tomorrow. Want to discuss Victoria Ashford's role in bias training. Interested in expanding her involvement. Another text arrived, this one from Sophia Martinez, who'd thrived in her role as senior purser and was now helping design training programs. Monthly discrimination reports just came in. 0 incidents across the entire fleet, 8 months straight. The culture shift is working. Marcus typed back quickly. It's working because people like you and Carlos are committed to doing better every day. Culture change isn't about policies. It's about people choosing to see each other's humanity. He walked through the terminal toward ground transportation, passing dozens of travelers of every race, age, and background. How many of them had stories like his? How many had been profiled, questioned, made to feel unwelcome in spaces they had every right to occupy? The Denver sky was clear through the terminal windows, and Marcus could see aircraft from various airlines on the tarmac. How many of those carriers had implemented similar programs after his video went viral? How many CEOs had reviewed their own policies and procedures, terrified of ending up as the next cautionary tale? Robert Kim's video had been viewed over 200 million times. Major news outlets had covered it. Congressional hearings had been held. Industry standards had changed. The phrase "sky bridge moment" had entered the lexicon, referring to any instance where authority was held accountable for discrimination. But real change didn't happen because of viral videos or media coverage or congressional hearings. It happened because people like Carlos chose to examine their own biases. Because people like Sophia chose courage over compliance. Because people like Victoria, even after losing everything, chose to face their failures and help others avoid the same mistakes. That was the real story, not the dramatic firing or the handcuffs or the millions of views. The real story was thousands of small moments across thousands of flights where employees chose to treat passengers with dignity instead of judgment. Marcus's phone buzzed again. A message from Captain Jennifer Walsh. Board meeting next week. They want to expand the bias training to all Aviation Partners caterers' ground crew maintenance teams. You changed the industry, Marcus. He smiled at that, slipping his phone into his hoodie pocket. The industry needed changing, had needed it for a long time. And sometimes change required someone willing to be uncomfortable to let discrimination play out just long enough to document it, to use their power for accountability instead of revenge. The car service was waiting outside a young black man in his early 20s, holding a sign with Marcus's name. He was dressed in a professional uniform, his posture confident, his smile genuine. Mr. Bennett, I'm James. I'll be your driver today. Thanks, James. Marcus followed him to a black sedan, settling into the back seat as they pulled away from the terminal. They drove in comfortable silence for a few minutes before James spoke up, his voice carrying a note of nervousness. Mr. Bennett, can I tell you something? Of course. I saw that video, the one from the flight. What happened to you? James kept his eyes on the road, but his voice was emotional. And it changed something for me. How so? Marcus leaned forward, slightly, genuinely interested. My whole life, people have looked at me and made assumptions. That I'm not smart enough. That I'm dangerous. That I don't belong in certain places. James's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. And I started to believe them. Started making myself smaller. Quieter, less threatening, apologizing for existing in spaces I had every right to be in. Marcus listened, recognizing the story because it was his story too. It was the story of so many black men who'd learned to manage other people's fear and prejudice by diminishing themselves. But watching you in that video, James's voice grew stronger the way you stayed calm, the way you didn't let them make you feel less than. The way you stood your ground with dignity and refused to accept discrimination quietly. Man, that changed something in me. He glanced at Marcus in the rearview mirror. I applied to business school after seeing that. University of Colorado. I start next semester, full-time MBA program. James, that's incredible. Marcus felt genuine emotion rising in his chest. You showed me that power doesn't come from making other people feel small. It comes from refusing to be made small yourself. James's voice was thick with feeling. So thank you. For being brave enough to let that happen. For documenting it. For showing people like me that we don't have to accept discrimination as the price of existing. They drove the rest of the way in silence, but it was the kind of silence that felt full rather than empty. Heavy with meaning and connection, and the understanding that sometimes one person's courage creates ripples that spread farther than anyone could predict. When they arrived at Marcus's hotel, James opened the door for him with a smile that suggested he saw himself differently now, saw possibility instead of limitation, saw a future shaped by his choices rather than other people's assumptions. Marcus handed him a generous tip along with a business card. When you graduate, James, call me. Bennett Capital Group is always looking for talented people who understand that real leadership means lifting others up. James stared at the card like it was made of gold. Sir, thank you. I won't let you down. I know you won't. Marcus smiled. You've already proven that by choosing to grow instead of shrink. That's the only qualification that really matters. As he walked into the hotel, Marcus thought about the 8 months since that night at JFK, about Victoria facing her failures in training sessions, about Sophia growing into leadership, about Carlos questioning his own assumptions, about James choosing education and ambition over the limitations others tried to impose. Change didn't happen because one CEO fired one flight attendant. Change happened because thousands of people saw what happened and chose to be better. Chose to examine their own biases. Chose to speak up instead of staying silent. Chose to see humanity instead of making assumptions. That was the real victory, not the viral video or the policy changes or the media coverage. The real victory was in moments like Carlos treating every passenger with equal dignity, in moments like Victoria choosing redemption over denial, in moments like James refusing to stay small. Those were the moments that actually changed the world. One person, one choice, one interaction at a time. You know what gets me about Marcus Bennett's story? It's not the dramatic confrontation. It's not the viral video that got 200 million views. It's not even the immediate firing or the policy changes or the industry transformation. It's the choice Marcus made in that crucial moment. When Victoria Ashford woke him up and demanded his boarding pass, Marcus had options. He could have immediately shown his ID, pulled out his phone and displayed his CEO credentials, said, "Do you know who I am?" and watched her entire demeanor change in seconds. He'd done exactly that before. Most successful people have. But that night, exhausted and frustrated and fed up with having to prove his humanity over and over again, Marcus made a different choice. He waited. He let Victoria reveal exactly who she was without the protective shield of his wealth and power forcing her to reconsider her prejudice. And in doing so, he created a moment that millions of people witnessed. A moment that couldn't be explained away or minimized or dismissed as a misunderstanding. A moment so clear, so documented, so undeniable that it forced everyone watching to confront an uncomfortable truth about how we judge each other. Here's what I've learned from Marcus's story. Real change doesn't come from individual acts of kindness or one-time training sessions or corporate diversity statements. Real change comes from exposing the truth about how discrimination actually works and creating consequences that can't be ignored. Victoria Ashford worked for Skybridge Airlines for 14 years. 14 years. How many other passengers did she profile during that time? How many other black travelers did she question? How many other people did she make feel unwelcome in spaces they had every right to occupy? And she got away with it. For 14 years, she got away with it because the people she discriminated against were either too tired to fight, too afraid of making a scene, or lacked the resources to hold her accountable. Until she couldn't anymore. That's the lesson. Prejudice survives in darkness. It thrives when we're too polite to call it out, too afraid to make waves, too exhausted to fight back. Marcus could have been polite, could have quietly complied, could have avoided the whole confrontation by showing his credentials immediately. But then nothing would have changed. Victoria would still be working. The policies would still be inadequate. The culture would still protect discrimination over dignity. And the next black passenger in a hoodie would face the same treatment. So here's what I want you to take from this story. First, your dignity is not negotiable. You don't have to prove you belong in spaces you have every right to occupy. Not to Victoria Ashford. Not to anyone. Your humanity isn't contingent on your bank account or your credentials or your ability to produce documentation that satisfies someone else's prejudice. Second, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to play along with discrimination. Marcus didn't get angry, didn't get loud, didn't make it easy for Victoria to paint him as the problem. He stayed calm, stayed controlled, and let her actions speak for themselves. That's strategic resistance. That's dignity as a weapon. Third document. Everything. Marcus had his phone recording. Robert Kim had his camera live streaming. In a world where everyone has a camera, accountability is possible in ways it never was before. Use that power. Be a witness. Create evidence that can't be disputed. Fourth, real leadership means using your power to change the whole thing, not just fix individual situations. Marcus didn't just fire Victoria. He rebuilt the entire culture, implemented real training, created accountability mechanisms, rewarded people who spoke up. That's the difference between revenge and justice. And finally, change is possible, but it requires people in positions of power who care more about doing what's right than protecting what's comfortable. If you're watching this and you've ever been made to feel like you don't belong in a store, on a plane, in a restaurant, in a classroom, anywhere, I want you to know something: you belong. You don't need permission. You don't need approval. You don't need to prove anything to people who've already decided not to see your humanity. And if you're watching this and you've never experienced what Marcus experienced, I want you to understand something too. This happens every day. In airports and hotels and retail stores and banks. It happens to people who are doing nothing wrong except existing in spaces where someone has decided they don't belong. And when you witness it, when you see someone being profiled, questioned, followed, or harassed, don't be Senator Mitchell. Don't recognize the injustice and then walk away because it's uncomfortable or inconvenient or might make you look bad. Be Robert Kim. Be Patricia Donovan. Be Sophia Martinez. Speak up. Record it. Stand as a witness. Refuse to let injustice happen in silence. Because that's how culture changes, not through one dramatic confrontation, but through thousands of small moments where people choose courage over comfort, choose truth over politeness, choose dignity over avoiding awkwardness. Marcus Bennett didn't set out to change an industry that night. He just wanted to sleep. He just wanted to get home after 72 hours of exhausting negotiations. He just wanted to rest in a seat he'd paid for. But when faced with injustice, he chose dignity over compliance. And in doing so, he created a moment that will echo far beyond one flight, one airline, one viral video. The sky belongs to everyone. The seats we occupy, whether in first class or economy, belong to whoever paid for them. And the respect we deserve as human beings isn't determined by our clothing, our appearance, or the color of our skin. it's determined by our humanity. And that's non-negotiable. So the next time you see someone being treated like they don't belong, remember Marcus Bennett sitting calmly in seat 1. While a flight attendant called the police on him for sleeping. Remember him staying composed while being handcuffed. Remember him using that moment to create change instead of just seeking revenge. And ask yourself, what choice will I make? Will I look away, or will I be a witness? Will I stay silent, or will I speak up? Will I protect comfort, or will I choose courage? Because Marcus Bennett showed us something powerful that night. He showed us that real change starts with one person refusing to accept discrimination quietly, one person choosing dignity, one person creating consequences for injustice. And then he showed us what happens when that person has the power to make those consequences matter. If this story moved you, share it. Not for the drama, not for the views, but for the lesson. Subscribe to this channel because we're going to keep telling stories about people who chose dignity over compliance, justice over silence, and courage over comfort. Like this video, if you believe everyone deserves respect, regardless of what they're wearing or how they look. And remember, justice begins with witnesses who refuse to look away. Be that witness. The Marcus Bennetts of the world are watching, and they're counting on us to be better.